Good evening. Settle in with me for true strange moments from war and the long echo after war. These accounts come from service members, families, and the places that still hold their breath. I will tell them carefully, with respect, and without sensational detail. If the dark ever feels too close, pause and breathe, then come back when you are ready. If stories like this keep you company, stay with me to the end. Tonight we begin at a fence line in the desert, where routine falters and a voice answers in a human tone. I was the new patrolman on the wire that night. The desert was quiet, the way a held breath is quiet. The floodlights clicked and hummed, throwing pale lanes across sand and scrub. Out beyond the fence, the land kept its own counsel. In here, the gravel knew our names. Training says you learn the map first. Ranges, berms, the long arcs of road that pretend to be straight. But there are notes that never make the map. Places where the radio goes soft. Gates that rattle even when the wind is sleeping. A ditch that smells like old rain. They sent us out after final chow. Nothing special. Routine steps, routine checks. My partner told jokes to keep the dark from getting ideas. I laughed enough to keep him brave. The moon looked thin as a badge and twice as tired. We turned along the perimeter, where warning signs hang like tired flags. On my right, the fence. On my left, the big empty. Somewhere south, a train mourned across miles of black. We stopped, listened, and moved again, because that is what you do when nothing is wrong, and that is the part that worries you. The first strange thing was the silence on the net. Not the dead kind, but the crawling kind. A thin insect hiss slid under the usual chatter and made the back of my head feel electric. I tapped the handset, checked the channel, checked the battery, checked my own pulse with my thumb. My partner grinned and asked if I was haunted already. I told him the set was having a small tantrum. He said the set had manners out here and only acted up when the land was awake. I asked what that meant. He shrugged, and the joke did not land. The far hills looked like ships run aground. A coyote cried somewhere we could not place. I heard a second voice under it, or thought I did, like a person imitating a whistle and getting the shape right, but not the soul. The hair on my forearms did a small parade. We came to the place where the fence makes a question mark around a wash. The sand held tracks I could not read. Rabbit, maybe. Boot, maybe. Something that preferred not to decide. I crouched and touched the print and felt heat still coming out of the ground. The hiss in my ear grew teeth. Words kept trying to form and then falling apart. A hello that stretched and thinned. A copy of a word I had not yet said. I knew better than to answer the air, so I stood up and made a small circle with my light and called it a field check. My partner went quiet, the way people do when they are building a wall inside their face. He said a story with no preface. A fence patrol years back. A man in buckskin inside the line where no one should be. A look away. Then a shape that did not match the first shape. He stopped there. I let him keep the rest. We kept moving. The gravel sounded too loud for our weight. I told myself I was hearing last week and last year layered over tonight. All the boots that had ever walked this same path, keeping time with us. Somewhere in the brush, something took a single step and then remembered we were listening. I turned my light away, on purpose. When you aim your beam at the unknown, you feed it. Better to give the dar nothing to eat. I let my eyes adjust and watched the fence for what fences do when they are tired. The top wire shifted as if breath had pushed it. A shape sat in the lane beyond the signs. I say shape because the word I want is animal, and the word after that is person, and between them, there is a place with no name. It held still like a story waiting for the sentence that gives it permission to thrive. We held still too. I felt my heartbeat try to walk away without me. I put it back where it belonged and kept the barrel low, because sometimes the most dangerous thing is not the thing in front of you, but the order you give yourself. The shape tipped its head, as if we were late. The radio cleared for a moment. A voice that sounded like my own cracked through and said a greeting I did not make. My mouth went dry fast. My partner said nothing, which told me he had heard it too. The voice came again, perfect, like a mirror that talks. We backed one slow step, and then another. The shape lifted on long joints that suggested a different set of rules. It did not come closer. It did not fade. It simply rearranged the idea of distance, the way heat does on an afternoon road. I remembered the briefing that does not live on paper. Do not answer the echo. Do not follow grief into the brush. If you must run, run toward the light, not away. I hated that the floodlight nearest us had begun to hum louder, as if it were made nervous by its own job. The night grew very careful. Even the insects seemed to listen. My partner whispered that the old stories like places with old fences. I wanted to say we were modern and safe and smarter than fear. Instead, I counted breaths and pretended numbers could be armor. The voice used my hello again and pushed it through the hiss. It put a question mark where my name should be. I did not give it a name. On the other side of the wire, the shape lowered, then lowered again, like a bad signal learning to stand. We retreated along the path we had made, not fast, not slow. The gravel approved, the floodlight steadied. The insect hiss dulled to a line I could step over. I held my breath and let it out like a receipt. That should have been the end of it. Routine resumes. Check the gate. Note the lock. Note the post where someone carved a date with a pocket edge long ago. But the land tightened instead, as if something under it was taking a second breath. Behind us, the greeting came once more. Same tone, same length. The kind of exact that only a recording can give. I felt my partner tense beside me. We did not look back. Some doors open when you face them. Some doors open when you do not. The fence line turned left. Our route said turn with it. The wash glowed faint and pale under the moon. Prince ran into the water cut and did not come out. The hairs on my arms saluted again, without asking me. I told the net we were green at our mark. The reply was clean and human, and blessedly boring. Either the hiss had decided we were not a game worth playing, or it had learned a better impression of silence. I chose the answer that let me weave. We reached the checkpoint and stood under the buzzing light. My partner asked me if I had seen the eyes. I told him I had seen something that would be called eyes if we needed a word later. We agreed not to need that word. The night did what nights do when they are almost over. The air cooled. The stars pressed down. The generator coughed and then remembered how to breathe. I wrote our line in the log. He drew a small square in the margin and filled it in like a window with no scene behind it. We had one last stretch of fence before home, the part that runs near the old ditch cut, the ditch that sometimes keeps its own weather. I did not want to give it another look. I did not want to give it my back either. We took the road that splits the difference. The map calls it a service lane. The wind calls it a memory. My boots spoke to each other in crunch and pause and crunch. The hush climbed the wires again, playful now, or hungry. I could not tell which. When the greeting came this time, it arrived from two directions at once, and one of the voices was mine, and the other belonged to someone who had not yet learned how to be human, and both of them asked if we were ready to hear the rest. The morning after, the base felt like a house where someone had whispered a secret and walked out. The air was clean and ordinary. The chow line clattered. On the surface, nothing had teeth. Still, the hush from the wire had followed me in, and curled under my bunk like a dog that did not belong to me. In the quiet of a booth, a staff sergeant held his coffee like it was a small fire. He watched me try to pretend I had slept. He said one sentence that sounded like it came from a place older than either of us. "Do not say your name to the dark when the dark says it first." I told him I was fine. He ignored the answer and kept talking. Where he grew up, the night could borrow a face or a voice or the shape of something you missed. It could ask for directions. It could ask for help. It could ask for your name. And once it had that, it could ask for more. The rule was simple. Let the question die on its own. He said parents carry these rules like pocket knives. They hand them to their kids when the kids start staying out late, when they learn to drive lonely roads, when they stand watch for the first time and mistake stillness for safety. He smiled without smiling. It is not about scaring. It is about giving you a way to come home. The list is short and easy to forget until the moment you need it. Do not whistle after dark, because you might call back more than wind. Do not pick up bones you find where no bones should be. Do not stare too long at tracks that do not decide what they are. If something looks almost right, treat almost like a warning. A corporal slid into the booth and added that in his home, older voices had another rule. If you hear a loved one outside your door at night, and they sound like themselves, except for a small wrong note, light a match and wait. A match does not scare the dark, he said. It makes the dark tell the truth. By late morning, the story had moved through barracks and motor pool, the way dust moves through light. No one said the name of what it might be. No one laughed in the way that kicks fear back under the bed. This was not the kind of fear that wants a fight. This was the kind that wants you to be careful. I called home and asked about the old rules we used to break when we wanted to feel brave. My mother said bravery and caution are not enemies. She told me the phrases that had kept her safe when the land felt awake. Salt at the door. A prayer you whisper without making a scene. A promise to step away if the hair along your arm stands on its own. By noon, the floodlights were asleep, and the fence line looked innocent again. A new shift took our route and came back with absolutely nothing to report, which is what reports are supposed to sound like. In the motor pool, someone turned a wrench and let the clink ring out until it faded. The radio behaved like a well-mannered guest. But the warnings stayed bright in my head, as if someone had written them in chalk on a blackboard and pushed the chalk into my hand. These were not superstitions to be collected like charms. They were working tools, the way a tourniquet is a tool. You hope not to need one. You also hope you are not the kind of person who laughs at a tourniquet. When the sun dropped, the base changed clothes again. Long shadows stretched like roads to places we did not plan to go. On the horizon, a mesa cut the last light into clean pieces. I stood at the edge of the lot and tried on someone else's common sense. If the night calls you by name, keep your answer in your pocket. You learn that warnings are not fences, they are lanterns. They do not cage anything in. They light your way out. They tell you how to move when you cannot trust what your eyes want to give you. Do not meet the echo in the middle. Do not chase a cry you cannot place. Do not let curiosity turn your head for you. The sergeant found me again and said the older stories talk about things that borrow. They borrow a walk that looks a little off. They borrow a voice that is a touch too clean. They borrow a shape that has the right number of limbs and the wrong way of using them. He did not argue for belief. He argued for caution. Belief is optional. Caution keeps count. I asked him whether the land keeps score. He said the land remembers. Some places stack memory deep. Training ranges leverage the places no one wanted for nicer purposes, he said. And those edges hold on to older tenants, older griefs. You do not have to sign for any of that but it knows how to find you at the fence. Late in the day, a story came from a cousin of a friend, a ranch hand way out past paved roads. Years ago, he was riding a low ridge at last light. The kind of evening when the air feels like it will crack if you talk too loud. He kept to the crown because the ground below him turned to mud when it pretended to be dry. He said warnings lived at his family's table too. Never ride alone after sundown unless you have to. If you have to, make sure the horse knows the way home better than you do. If something looks back at you with a person's patience, turn away. You cannot outthink the kind of patience that lives outside. He told his friend he broke that third rule that night, without meaning to. On the far slope, a shape stood shoulder tall and still. Coyote, he thought at first. Then he thought, no. The shoulders sit too square for that. The wind laid down so he could hear his own leather creak. The horse took a half step and stopped under him, like someone had placed a hand on its chest. The shape on the rise tipped its head in a very human way, as if it had expected him sooner and was deciding whether to be polite about the delay. The rider told himself it was just a coyote that had learned a new trick. He told himself coyotes learn new tricks all the time. He told himself a third story to cover the second story. The shape did not blink. He reached down and touched the worn spot on his saddle where his father's hand had lived for years. A habit that felt like a small prayer. The wind picked up and carried a dry smell that was not quite animal and not quite dust. The shape opened its mouth and did not show teeth. The horse shivered once, like a string pulled through it, and set its feet again. The shape on the rise held that human tilt a heartbeat longer, then turned as if to leave the conversation unfinished. A sharp report walked across the flats. Not close, not far. Just the kind of distance that makes you think someone else has been watching this whole time and decided to add their opinion. The rider did not see the flash. He only saw the shape fold, no flail, no scramble, just a quiet giving way, as if an invisible hand had pressed the air flat. The horse did not bolt. It did a different thing. It lowered its head and waited for orders from an older rider who was not there. The man let the reins slide and told the saddle he understood. He listened for a second shot that did not come. Wind moved through grass that had forgotten rain. The ridge ahead climbed in a slow curve toward a narrow crown. If he took it steady, he could look down the backside without dropping into anything he could not climb out of. He kept to the spine, where the ground stayed honest. He told himself coyotes tip over for reasons that are not mysterious. Illness, old age, bad luck with a tire iron. The words helped until they did not. The air had that freezer-cold quality you get in summer right after sunset, when heat steps aside and lets older weather through. At the spot where the rise had held the silhouette, he found scuffed soil and a shallow slide, as if something had given up its balance and been eased down by the hill rather than thrown. No fresh blood, no spray, only a darker smear, like a hand had dragged a wet cloth and then changed its mind. The horse breathed loud. The sound felt too human. The rider patted its neck and said a name he used only when both of them needed reminding. He could step off, tie off, and look. Or he could keep the height and use his eyes the way his father taught him, wide first, then narrow. Downhill. The slope broke toward a stand of brush and a thin cut that might hold water when the sky was in a better mood. Tracks led that way in a skipping line that could have been coyote, could have been a person moving with a bad ankle, could have been something that wanted you to argue with yourself until your choices got small. He saw tucked in a clump of buckbrush a pinch of fur caught on a twig. Coarse, gray ordinary, the kind that collects on a barbed fence and tells you nothing new. Next to it, almost touching, a single thread of something like twine, except it glinted as if a sun lived inside it. He did not touch either. The smell changed. Not rot, not the metallic tang of a fresh wound. A clean, cold odor, like wet coin and creek stone. The horse rolled an eye and set one forefoot down with a care it usually saved for ice. He thought about the rules handed across a kitchen table. Do not pick up what the land is still using. Do not follow a trail into brush if the trail looks like it could talk. Do not let pity write your plan. But he also thought about stock loss to any predator with a healthy appetite, and about who would answer at the house if he came back and said he let something walk that might come back. Mean. Responsibility can sound a lot like bravery when you say it out loud. He eased the horse forward along the crown until the ridge gave him the view he wanted. The world beyond fell away in a clean line. He could see the gully, the brush, and the shallow bowl where the slide must have ended. There was a shape in the bowl. Not flat, not still in the way of a final stop. It was gathered, as if trying to keep itself together. One limb lay wrong, another's tucked in close the way people do when they are protecting a secret. The fur he expected did not cover all of it. The rider felt the part of his mind that names things go quiet, as if it had walked to the door and stepped outside for air. He took a breath and let it out slow, the way you do when a skittish colt watches you and you want it to see a soft outline. The horse flicked an ear, waiting for the cue to move or flee. He kept his hand steady on the rein and let the scene settle into clear lines. In the bowl, the shape shifted, and the light caught on something that did not belong on any wild animal. He was still deciding whether to dismount when the thing down there turned its head just enough to show him a piece of a face he knew only from mirrors. The bull held its breath. The rider and the horse held theirs. The thing at the bottom made a small, ordinary motion, the kind that belongs to a person who has forgotten they are being watched and adjusts their shoulder for comfort. He waited for the piece of face to belong to a stranger. It did not. It was the kind of glimpse you get in a window at night, when your room goes dark and the glass gives you back a version of yourself you do not like. Cheek and brow, and the set of a mouth that could belong to any rancher in any town, except it lived under a scatter of coarse hair that did not decide on species. The horse made a soft sound in its throat. The ridge wind went to ground and the world sharpened. He slid out of the saddle one careful inch at a time, keeping leather quiet, keeping metal from speaking. He did not tee off. He laid the rein over the horn, so the horse could step if it needed, and not drag him into the bowl if the ground asked for both of them at once. He took 3 steps down the slope, where the soil held, angling away from the brush, so his silhouette stayed poor. The smell in the air thinned from creek stone to something like an old cellar that has been opened into light for the first time in years. Not rot, more like a memory pulled out of storage. From here, the details refused to be orderly. A paw where a hand should begin, a hand where a paw should finish. Long joints that did not agree with each other about direction. The hide along the flank looked wrong, in the same way a badly mended coat looks wrong. The seam too straight for the fabric around it. And the face, when it turned a little more, wore the exhausted, puzzled look of a person who woke up in the wrong clothes. The rider felt a small, sharp grief for something he did not have a name for. He wanted to call it mercy, but mercy requires an act, and the only acts he had on offer felt like invitations to a larger trouble. The shape tried to stand, and did not. The movement ran through it in waves that started true and ended strange. A low sound came out of it, not an animal cry, not a word. A sound a throat makes when it tries to choose between 2 languages at once and keeps the worst of both. He could walk down, place a jacket, speak soft nonsense, and have that gesture live in his head forever. He could put a clean end to a suffering he barely understood and have that act live there too. He did neither. Instead, He stepped back until the ridge took him out of the bull's direct eye. The rules he had been given as a boy arranged themselves in a short line. Do not touch what is shapeshifted between worlds unless you want both of those worlds to follow you home. Do not let pity become a leash. Do not earn a story that will not stop telling itself. He went to the horse and found its ears pinned, not with fear exactly, but with a working kind of focus. He rubbed the neck once, not to calm it, but to ask it to keep steady. Then he turned the horse up along the ridge to where a spill of rock made a shallow overhang like a mouth half open. There, tucked back under the lip, he found what the hill holds for creatures who do not want to be seen. A pocket large enough for a body, dry ground, a notch where wind curves around instead of through. He cleared loose stones with his boot and pulled brush to break the shape. He was not digging a grave. He was making a place to be hidden. He went back for the form in the bowl. The descent felt like a long conversation with the earth about where feet go when you do not wish to be announced. He did not look directly at the wrongness. He looked at edges and weights and the way a shoulder sits in a hollow. When he reached the figure, he spoke aloud without meaning to. Just a little nonsense you say to a hurt horse, a hurt child. We are going. Come on now. Easy. The skin under his hands did not make up its mind. Some of it held a coarse coat. Some of it held a thin warmth that could only be described as skin-iced, the way a small fire can only be described as fire when you see it from a distance. He felt joints resist, then comply, then resist again, as if they had been designed for a different gravity. He did not lift. He asked the ground to do the first part and let the slope give him motion. He steadied the head with one forearm and told the eyes not to look at him. They did anyway. They looked like any tired eyes past their limit. It took a human amount of time to move that mixed body to the pocket under rock. He worked without haste, because haste would have turned him into a noise, and noise would have turned the moment into a signal for things he did not want arriving. In the shade, he settled the figure in a way that made it smaller, less visible, less like a declaration. He pulled brush across the mouth of the pocket and left a slit for air, because whatever it was still a breathing thing. And even if a breath ended there, he would not be the one to press it out. He found along the flank a place where the seam looked too clean, not a wound in the way the body meets a blade, more like a line where two truths had been stitched with a thread the world does not usually keep on hand. He looked away fast and felt the urge to sweep the air with his hand, as if to erase what he had seen. He did not. On the ride home, the horse chose the line, and he did not argue. The sun had dropped enough to make the mesquite throw long shadows like ropes across the path. He let the ropes fall across his boots and counted them without meaning to, as if they could measure the distance between him and what he had left behind. At the house, he said little. The words made him feel as if a second mouth were speaking along with his own, following his sentence a half-beat late. He washed his hands twice, using the old bar from the sink that smelled like lime and iron. He told his uncle first. The older man listened with his face turned down toward the table. The way you face rain when you do not plan to leave, and do not plan to let it soak you either. When the telling was done, the uncle poured water into a chipped cup and set it where the wall and the floor meet. For the thirsty, he said. The second talk happened after dark, under a weak porch bulb with moths arguing over it. A cousin with a braid to his waist and a laugh that usually showed up early did not laugh at all. He said, "You did not shoot it." The writer said no. The cousin nodded, as if a balance had been kept on one small scale, even if a larger one had tipped somewhere else. Then came the warnings, spoken in the plain tone families use when they are handing you the tools they expect you to use. You will not go back to that hill. You will not talk to anyone who does not already carry the same stories in their blood. You will keep salt at your door for a while, and you will not let anyone call your name from outside after midnight, even if the voice sounds right. Especially if the voice sounds right. The writer said he had already thought about returning to see if the figure needed help that a human hand could offer without breaking any laws of either place. The uncle's face changed in the way old wood changes when the weather turns. He said, "That is not help. That is a trade you cannot price." They burned a pinch of sage in a coffee can and let the smoke walk through the doorway and around the windows. They did not chauny. They did not make a show. They made 3 slow circles and said nothing and let the air learn a new pattern. Late, when the house had gone quiet and the cup at the baseboard had sweated a small ring onto the floor, the writer dreamed he was back on the ridge. In the dream, the bowl was empty. In the dream, the overhang held only shadow. In the dream, the fence of the training range far to the west hummed like a radio, choosing which voice to copy next. He woke with the taste of dust and iron in his mouth, and the certainty that some choices do not end where you think they do. He sat up, feet on cool boards, and listened. The night pressed its ear to the house, the way a person does when they are deciding whether to knock. In the morning, he saddled up for work on the other side of the property and took the long way on purpose so that his horse's hooves would not remember the measure of that ridge. When a neighbor asked after him at the store, he said fine, and meant it in the way a person means it when the word has to be big enough for a secret. For a time, the land was polite. Cattle walked where cattle should. The wind stayed in its proper lanes. But now and then, on still evenings, a greeting would drift from the broken country beyond the far fence. It never used his name. It never needed to. He did not answer. He busied his hands. He let the light run out on its own. The base maps look clean when you lay them flat on a table. Neat lines, neat labels, a tidy fence that says inside and outside, like the world respects that kind of handwriting. On foot, in weather, the edges are not so polite. Washes eat under the wire. Wind carries seed that does not care about clearance. Coyotes learn the meal schedule and travel like they have badges. You walk the perimeter enough nights, and you start to recognize the moods of the land, the way you recognize a friend's voice on a bad day. The far berms go quiet. The tall grass holds its breath. The power poles click, and then forget to click. Not trouble exactly. More like a rehearsal for trouble. We had a saying that did not make it onto any poster. Fences keep honest things honest. They do not tell a determined thing what to do. That counted for people, for weather, and for whatever walked the dark with a borrowed voice. You keep the line anyway, because lines help you remember where you are when the night tries to convince you that you are somewhere else. Out where the floodlights thin into moonlight, the base makes small treaties with its older tenants. Drainage cuts that become highways for paws and hooves. Culverts that sing after rain and draw every living thing to drink. A stand of stubborn mesquite that no machine can be bothered to conquer for long. The wild takes the invitation like a guest who knows the door code. During the day, range control talks about arcs and fans and safety bubbles. At night, those shapes come off the board and lie down over ravines and tank trails. You feel them more than see them, like the pressure before a storm. Nobody teaches this in class. You learn by walking and by going quiet when the quiet asks for quiet back. We took a new stretch after dusk, a ribbon of road that ran along a fence repair so fresh, the posts still smelled like cut wood. The contractor had left a neat stack of extra mesh against a brace. A jackrabbit sat next to it, the way an uncle sits beside luggage at a bus stop. It did not flinch when our lights slid over it. It watched in a way that made me feel like the one on display. My partner said what he always said when some little thing felt a degree off. Keep moving until the weird has to work harder. I liked the phrase because it gave the night a job and reminded us we had one too. We crossed a low spot where a winter flood had dropped silt in a wide smile. Prints layered there like a page that would not erase. Boot, paw, small barefoot from a training exercise last month, tire, and something that made a long, undecided stitch across the rest. I did not kneel to study. The land offers homework. You decide how much to do. 100 yards later, the fence angled toward a bluff that wore its geology like bones under thin skin. The mesh there was patched and repatched in places, none of it sloppy, all of it honest about the life of metal that lives outdoors. Someone had hung a spent casing on the top where a little ding bell that could tell you when the wind changed its mind. The day shift had passed us a rumor, folded inside a warning. Cattle found outside one morning with their tags cut clean, no footprints worth a name, no sign of bolt cutters or bored kids, no sign of anything that leaves the usual mess. Range control shrugged and solved paperwork. The rumor walked faster than the shrug. Someone had scrawled a date on the post at Checkpoint Bravo, a date that belonged to a year when my boots were still too big. Next to it, a small square carved the way my partner liked to fill boxes in the log. The world loves its patterns, even the tiny ones. I touched the carved square as if it were a doorbell, and told myself it was only wood. The radio stayed well-mannered, a relief that felt too shiny to trust. We did not race the quiet. We let it set the pace. Crickets came back to work. The hum on the lines found a rhythm and kept it. The floodlights pooled where they were told to, and did not spill like last night. We turned down a service lane that shadowed the wire. On the other side, the land fell into a shallow bowl, dotted with creosote, each bush holding its own circle of dark. Years in uniform teach you to index small changes. A broken twig that has not yet dried pale. A strand of hair on a barb that still shines like it remembers the head it came from. A patch of dust wiped clean as if a hand had smoothed it. I could feel the old stories leaning in, without words. Not the folklore itself, but the human habit of gathering puzzle pieces when we should be walking. I put my eyes back on the task. Count the posts. Check the ties. Listen after each step to see if the step echoes only once. The road rose a breath and then leveled. From that small height, you could see the fence run straight for a good long while. The way a sentence runs straight when the writer finally knows what they want to say. The wire lines looked like staff paper, and the wind wrote its thin music on them. My partner touched my sleeve and made a small motion with his chin. A habit from a place where pointing is rude and speaking is a good way to get heard by whatever else is listening. I followed his eyes to a sag in the fence 30 yards ahead, where a maintenance crew had left a temporary brace and a ribbon of bright tape that caught the moon and fluttered like a moth. Inside the line, in the throw of our light but too far for faces, a figure stood where no figure should stand without a badge and an escort. The first thought was ranch hand. The second was lost hiker. The third did not want a name. The shape wore old buckskin the color of dry hills and held itself with the calm of someone who had been waiting and did not mind waiting longer. We stopped the way you stop in a church when the last note of a hymn is still in the rafters. My partner said softly, "We have company." The radio chose that moment to behave exactly as designed. Clear channel, clear tone. We could have given a simple report. We could have asked for a rover and a truck and the reassuring geometry of more bodies and more light. We could have said, "Identify yourself, sir," and felt the night grow ordinary again. I raised the hand ceased, and the figure smiled, very small, as if it had heard a thought and approved of it. The first thing I did was count the ways this could be normal. A contractor who missed a gate, a ranger from a partner agency cutting through to save a mile, a retiree with a map older than our fence. The second thing I did was see that none of those fit the man in front of us. He stood just inside the wire in buckskin the color of sand that remembers rain. The fringe lay still even though the night had a little wind in it. A small pouch hung at his chest, the kind you wear because it has already carried something important, not because it plans to. I said, "Sir," the way my instructors taught me, with respect and taste in it. I said, "We need to see your badge and escort you out." My partner took half a step broadside to give us angles that make a diagram look neat. The training clicked in. So did the part of me that wanted to keep my voice low so the land would not hear me trying to be in charge. The old man turned his face toward us. Not a full turn, just enough to let the light touch one cheek and the long line of a nose that could have belonged to half the grandfathers in the county. His eyes did not catch the light the way eyes usually do. They held it like a cup holds water and lets you see a little sky in it. I brought the handset up. The channel was clean a moment ago. Now it made that small crawling sound that feels like a tooth on foil. I tapped the button, rolled the dial, checked the antenna with a pinch and a twist. The set answered with a long hush, like a crowd waiting for a name to be called. My partner tried his. Same hush, same polite refusal. The man took a single step, not toward us, not away. Just the kind of step you take when you are deciding whether to continue a conversation or leave one. His buckskin creaked the way old saddles talk when they approve of a rider. I said again that we needed identification. I gave the exact phrase that makes lawyers happy. He smiled a small, tired smile, the kind you give a kid who is using the right words because somebody told him the right words would work out here. The fence between us did a soft, strange thing. It felt taller without changing height. It felt heavier without gaining weight. The top wire hummed in a key that made the floodlight over our shoulder choose a new kind of buzz. My partner kept his hands visible and his barrel low. He asked the gentleman to move toward our gate at Checkpoint Charlie, where we could do this in a bright, ordinary way. He pointed without pointing, the chin tilt that says "this direction, please." The man's mouth moved. If sound came, the night kept it. What reached us was a shape of words without the words themselves, like a radio transmission heard from the next room. The feeling of a greeting sat in my ears without the greeting. I could feel the urge to fill the silence with my own name. A polite reflex to you tell a stranger who you are so they can tell you who they are. My tongue went heavy in my mouth. Behind my ribs, something old shook its head no. The man's gaze passed over my face and settled on my partner's shoulder patch, like it recognized the emblem and had an opinion about it. Not anger, not approval. More like a memory finding a hook to hang itself on. The radio cleared for a breath, like a door cracking. A voice came through in a tone that matched the man's mouth and did not belong to any of us. It said a hello shaped like mine. My partner looked at me. I looked at him. The door in the radio closed. We had options. We could try the loud, authoritative version and see if the night respected volume. We could close distance and let procedures carry us like a river. Or we could treat this like a snake across a porch, pause, measure, and choose a way around that did not make us into a story someone else has to finish. I chose to breathe and shift my weight, so my boots stopped crunching. The old man watched the shift with the quiet interest people give to a child's magic trick that they have seen before and liked anyway. I blinked because eyes blink. My partner glanced at the fence brace a handspan to the left, as if lines and corners could remind him which world we were standing in. Not even a heartbeat passed. And where the old man had been, there was only the tidy rectangle of sand his feet had pressed, softening as we watched, as if the ground had revised itself and asked us not to remember the earlier draft. We stood very still. The radio let out a single small click, that did not belong to any setting I know. My partner drew a slow breath and said, "Do not turn fast." I asked why. "Because," he whispered, "there's something watching from inside the line, and it wants you to make the first move." The creature sat where the old man had stood, as if someone had swapped actors between scenes and hoped we would not notice. A rabbit, if size were not a fact, tall in the way a child's drawing is tall, ears like flags that had forgotten wind, body poured into stillness so complete it made my knees ache. "Do not turn fast," my partner said again, so soft the night had to lean in to hear him. I let my eyes slide, slow as a clock hand, until the thing lived at the edge of my vision. Edges are honest. They do not sell you details. They tell you only enough to survive. I have seen jackrabbits hold a pose and make a statue jealous. I have never seen one watch with the attention people save for news of themselves. Its gaze felt like a measure. Not hunger, not fear, a kind of counting. We stood in the hush that comes before a radio chooses to speak. My thumb found the push to talk and rested there without pressing. The way your hand finds a railing on stairs you are not sure of. The rabbit tipped its head a fraction in a human rhythm. Not the quick, nervous bob you expect from prey. A small acknowledgement. The nod you give across a room to someone you would prefer not to meet, but will meet if the evening insists. My partner said, "On me," and we took one step together toward the checkpoint gate. Not retreat, not advance. A small correction of position. The way you adjust a picture frame that is a breath off level. The thing tracked our movement without moving anything but the tilt of those long ears. The ears were wrong in the way a clean replica is wrong. Too symmetrical, too still. Like props that had been told to act like ears and had memorized the lines without learning the part. I put my eyes on the familiar. Fence post, tie wire. The dent in the top rail, where a loader had kissed it years back. The spent casing hung like a bell. The little square my partner carved in every log book landed in my head and made a square out of the world that I could stand inside. The floodlight hummed one note up. The radio gave a half breath of static, cleared its throat, and returned to waiting. I did not give it anything to carry. The rabbit did a strange thing then. It shifted without the space between positions. No spring, no coil. Sitting, then nearer. With only the trace of disturbed dust to argue that time had passed. My mind tried to fill in the missing frames and found none to borrow. My partner's voice dropped into that dry, easy humor he keeps for moments that need a human anchor. "That is one big bunny," he said, and the line steadied the ground under us. I liked the idea that we could joke and therefore be funny. The idea did not like me back. The animal lore. The idea of an animal took another frame of distance without honoring the steps between. We reached the padlocked gate and the clean geometry of chain through steel. Human work looks like itself in any light. It calmed my hands. I checked the hasp, because checking a hasp is something a person can do when the rest of the scene refuses to shake your hand. On the other side of the mesh, the rabbit turned its head toward the fence in a way that wondered. Then, as if a new answer had arrived, it looked past us to the checkpoint road. The motion had the patience of an elder sitting on a porch. Wind moved through creosote and told the land a story we were not invited to hear. Behind us, far down the line, a floodlight blinked once and decided against it. The casing on the wire gave a tiny out-of-time tap. The rabbit lowered, slow, deliberate, until its belly brushed sand. Then it rose, joints long and unpromising, until it stood taller than any rabbit has earned the right to stand. It balanced there on its hind legs, a silhouette too neat for the scruffy business of being alive. We did not raise weapons. We raised our attention, which felt more dangerous. I tried the radio with a whisper of pressure. "Range, this is Patrol at Charlie. We have the rest." Did not leave my mouth. A voice reached us from the set, clear as a classroom, in a tone that wore my name the way a well-tailored suit wears a body. It said hello in my voice. Then it said my partner's name in my partner's voice. Then it said both, as if practicing chords. The rabbit did not react. Or it did, but in a way only the skin on my forearms understood. I eased my thumb off the button. The radio went polite again. A floodlight down the road hummed 2 notes lower, as if relieved to be left out. I blinked. My partner blinked. And where the rabbit had been, there was empty ground. Not empty like absence, empty like a room that still remembers the furniture. Behind us, outside the fence, a figure waited under the angled arm of a maintenance light. Same buckskin, same small pouch, same patient posture of someone who arrived the right amount of early and has not been inconvenienced by it. The fence between us was tall enough to keep trucks honest, tall enough that a person does not climb it in silence without leaving proof for the next shift to complain about. The ground on both sides told no story except the oldest one: dust doing what dust does. The man lifted a hand, palm open, a courtesy from another era. The gesture reached us without sound. The floodlight nearest him stuttered, chose a tone, and held it. We traded a look that contained the entire manual and none of it. "Sir," I called, careful, formal, as if formality could laminate us against strangeness. "Please remain where you are. We will come to you." He lowered his hand and inclined his head a fraction, the nod a person gives when they allow you to pretend you are directing the scene. We moved along the fence toward the proper gate, minds doing the little math of distance, time, body angles, backup that was not here yet, and might not be the kind of backup we needed if this was not a trespass in the ordinary sense. My partner kept his eyes on the figure. I kept mine on the ground, because the ground is more likely to tell you the truth. I saw nothing. Not the smudges a climber leaves when he cheats the top wire. Not the snags on mesh. Not a footprint bigger than any rabbit deserves to own. Not a print human enough to file. We reached the gate, locks in our hands, the chain a reassuring song. I felt the old instinct to announce with my name again, to make this a conversation between neighbors, instead of between a rule and a rumor. The man raised his head, a hair, as if he felt the thought. The radio, hanging against my chest, gave the softest click, the sound a tongue makes before it chooses a word. And then, from the ravine behind us, on the inside of the fence, the side where we stood, something answered in a voice that sounded like the old man, and like me, and like a record of all the greetings we had not said. And it spoke from too close. The ravine breathed a word at our backs and made our names into questions. I did not turn. Turning answers a question you did not ask. I took one step that looked like an accident and angled my body so the fence and my partner and the dark all lived in the same slice of eye. The figure outside the wire buckskin, pouch, patience, stood where we had first seen him at the SIG. The rabbit was not anywhere because it had never liked being only one thing. The radio lay quiet in the way a lake is quiet when the wind pretends to have somewhere else to be. Inside the line, behind us, something stood up from low scrub and arranged itself the way a person arranges a jacket. Not loud, not slow, only certain. The sound had the weight of a decision landing. My partner said, "Steady," and took the lock in his hand, as if a good square of chain could make a bargain with the night. I breathed the way our instructors teach, for a shot you do not plan to take. In for a count, out for a count. Let the numbers lay track under your feet. The old man lifted his chin as if to listen for rain. The gesture went through me, like a small cold nail. Then he was farther down the fence without being between. No steps, no scramble. Standing, then standing elsewhere, the way a thought moves from one room to another without opening the door. Impossible, my brain said. Practiced, something older said back. The thing in the ravine chose a shape that made the world flinch. It unfolded onto long hind limbs, as if discovering an old habit. First a crouch, then a tall, clean rise that belonged to a deer, only if a deer had learned where to put its hands. It swayed once, finding balance the way a man will use words in a second language. Then it turned toward the fence. Do not run, I said, because I am a liar when I am afraid. We moved it, not a sprint yet. The version of running that keeps dignity. The path along the wire opened like a chute built for exactly this choice. Floodlights made a ladder of pale rungs on the ground. We stepped the rungs too fast to count. Behind us, the two-leg sprint started. It did not pound. It patterned. The cadence sounded like a person who had studied how feet hit dirt and then written a better way to do it. The hair along my arms went alert without asking permission. My partner said, "Gate at Bravo. Keep your eyes on the steel." And I loved the idea that steel could fix what a voice had broken. The old man outside the fence paced us with those doorless moves, station to station. One moment by the sag, next moment by the brace with the ribbon, next by the bright tape itself, fluttering harmlessly against a sleeve that should have snagged and did not. The mesh between in and out hummed high, like a line drawn too tight. We ran the maintenance road, boots finding the parts where gravel holds and does not betray you. I had the sensation of moving under a ceiling that lowered inch by inch, like a tunnel deciding whether to be a throat. Behind us, the steps closed a little, then a little more. Each gain arrived in a kinslice of time, without the mess of effort, as if it were skipping the parts of running the body dislikes. The radio tried to talk me into stopping. My voice came out of it, claiming to be calm, claiming to be safe, claiming to have found an open gate ahead. It even added a small laugh I had used once in the chow hall. I have never hated a sound more. Do not answer the echo. Let the question die on its own. I held the rule in my teeth like a nail and kept going. We made the turn where the fence kisses a rock face and the road pinches. Ahead, the proper gate stood with its honest padlock and the friendly square someone had carved into the post long ago. The sight hit me like water. And then the man in buckskin was on our side of the wire. No climb, no cut. One frame of the world, then the next, and the fence did not get a vote. He stood in the checkpoint road, hand raised, palm out, as if directing traffic at a funeral. We stopped because the body obeys certain gestures, even when the mind protests. The thing that ran on two legs did not stop. It came into the edge of our light, long elbows pumping the way. Running is not supposed to look, mouth open as if tasting the path. It did not pant. It did not labor. It simply arrived stronger with each stride, the way a bad idea gains proof as you repeat it. The old man did not look back at it. He looked at us. And then he spoke very softly in a voice that sounded like both of our names braided together, and told us exactly where we should run if we wanted to live long enough to tell this wrong story once. I keep a map on my desk that is not the one the army uses. Their map has range fans and danger arcs, and a careful grid that tells you how not to hurt your own. Mine is older in some places and younger in others. I pencil in the stories where they land, then shade the paper where the land itself seems to be doing the talking. Arizona keeps coming up. The high country north of the big interstate, where pines thin into open ground. A munitions depot with long, low bunkers set like teeth in the earth. A fence honest enough to keep trucks obedient. And beyond that fence, homelands that taught their children not to answer when the night says their names first. I am not saying the place made the stories. I am saying the place holds them well. Storage igloos under snow, under sun, under years. Railroad spurs that do not remember the last true cargo. Tracks of elk and coyote and boots that belong to people who live with both. Names that wear wind like a shawl. Names that were there before the wind learned English. On paper, the depot is tidy. In memory, it is mixed. Soldiers tell me about drills broken by a voice that sounded familiar and came from beyond the wire. They tell me about an old man seen where no visitor should be, and about a rabbit the size of a mistake that will not admit it is one. They tell me this in tones that lean away from their own words, as if the sentences might swing back if they speak them too loudly. I mark Camp Navajo in a small circle and write maybe in the margin. I am careful with maybes. A maybe can turn into a claim if you stare at it too long. A claim can turn into a lie if you want it to. I keep a line of caution drawn across the middle of the page. Geography is not guilt, but patterns are not spy. They step forward and ask to be noticed. What else lives near there? Old trails that never cared about new fences. Family places where warnings flow like coffee. Know your name and do not give it away. If something looks wrong in a way you cannot prove, treat wrong as proof enough. Keep salt handy. Keep breath quiet. Come home by the long road rather than the fast one, if the fast one feels watched. I call 3 people who have stood guard on those perimeters in 3 different decades. Their voices wear the same weather. None of them plan to meet each other. All of them say the radio sometimes fills with a person who sounds like themselves, and the sound knows a joke they once made and uses it like a key. I write that down and circle it twice. It is not the only place. The pencil trails west on my map, through mountain and plain and city, to a base by the sea where hills dry out in summer and grow a second skin of fog when the ocean breathes deep. Rattlers like the tank trails there. Bobcats own the gullies. Marines own the rest until the dark decides to run a drill it did not schedule. A boot tells me about a night on watch when the air filled with a predator's trill and a shape in the brush refused to be only an animal. The report sits in my stack like a piece that completes a picture and makes you wish it had not. Turn the map. Keep the pencil. The coast waits for our footsteps. Camp Pendleton backcountry holds a special kind of quiet. Not empty. Trained. Ravines tuck their elbows in. Chaparral keeps its counsel. The ocean breathes somewhere you cannot see and still manages to steady your hands. We were a small watch on a ridge that looked down into brush, the color of old canvas. The night had that good field smell, dust, oil. The ghost of yesterday's cordite, pretending to be a memory worth keeping. Someone cracked an energy drink. Someone else told the tired joke that makes the third hour feel like it belongs to people. It came in as a sound first. Not coyote, not a wool, not fox. A thin predatory trill that stitched the dark from left to right, faster than any set of feet could own. It had that hunting quality you hear from cats when they mean business, except it traveled like a rumor on fresh wheels. We all heard it, and did the small thing men do when they want to make a noise disappear. Gaze down, breath shorter, necks a hair lower inside collars. The boot to my left said, "Real funny, Staff Sergeant," like he thought someone had bought a novelty whistle and waited all week to use it on him. I wanted it to be that. A dumb prank you could fix by throwing the whistle into the ravine and pretending you never owned one. The sound did a second lap around us, without asking permission. I put glass on the slope, standard issue optic, not hero gear, steady enough for work if your heart remembers not to kick. The brush moved in a way that did not match the breeze. The breeze moved in a way that did not match the brush. Small, wrong harmonies. To the right, our gunner set up behind a better piece of glass that likes heat more than light. His voice went quiet, in the way people's voices go when they are counting between heartbeats. "Got a tall coyote," he said without meaning a word of it. We made the huddle that still covers a lot of ground without putting shoulders together. Range check. Backstops. Don't silhouette. Don't chase weird. The usual talk you do, so the world hears you being professional and decides to join in. The trill, cut off in the middle, like a phone call that hit dead air. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise. Then the shape appeared, downhill, between two hunched bushes that looked like cousins on bad terms. At first glance, deer. Too narrow for elk. Too long in limb for anything else at this elevation. Ears up, head low, the way they go when they know you and you know them, and both of you have the decency to act surprised. Except it did not act like a deer. It stood up. Not the rearing, not the little stretch. It rose in a clean, practiced lift until it owned the space, the way a person does when they decide to be taller than the room allows. Hind limbs straightened into an argument against their own design. Forelimbs hung in a way that made my shoulders itch. The boot to my left said the word nope in Stacy's AGCC's. My brain tried to correct the frame. Okay. Man in a ghillie. Okay. Person in a suit. Okay. Trick of angles. None of those answers wanted to live inside my head for long. It stayed there a heartbeat, like a bad photograph you cannot delete. Then it ran uphill on two legs. That is the part I will go to my grave arguing with. It did not hop. It did not bound. It ran, elbows back, like it had practiced in a mirror. Feet placing with the certainty of someone who knows a course and wants to show you their time. The gunner breathed in, out, and said, "I am on," which is the kind of sentence that makes everyone else find their place in the picture. I tilted for a better lane and tasted the metallic air you get when the night flips a switch and hit you. We could have dropped it. Probably. We were within our rights to light the slope and to stop something that was not a someone inside the boundary of a live fire range after hours. But the range felt like a church all of a sudden, and I do not shoot in a church unless the church shoots first. The thing cut left through a stand of buckwheat, came out clean on the other side, corrected its balance with a little swing of one arm in an almost human rhythm, and never broke stride. The boot whispered, "Deer are weird, right?" and then laughed a small laugh that sounded like it was trying on bravery for the first time and finding the sleeves a bit long. I tried to build a normal explanation and stack it high enough to see over the moment. Deer stand sometimes. Yes. Deer do strange things, yes. Deer do not run like that. Not there. Not like that. The gunner kept the thermal on it and started to say what he saw, then stopped. Sometimes the kindness you give your own mind is to leave out the list. We watched it gain the ridge opposite like a runner, finishing a hill interval and easing off at the crest perfectly composed. No labor in the chest, no shake in the knees. It turned at the top and gave us a sideways look that did not belong to a prey animal at night. It felt like a person checking whether we were impressed. My tongue tried to say, "Keep eyes on, keep eyes on," and my throat chose silence instead. The brush swallowed it as neatly as a pocket takes a coin. The ravine remembered how to be a ravine again. Crickets punched back in. The breeze remembered its route and stopped bumping into the bushes. The radio clicked once, like a teacher tapping a desk to bring a class back to order. Somebody coughed. Somebody else asked whether unit names had any rules about being earned or could be taken in a moment and made yours. We picked one. A joke that turned into a badge for what we could not carry any other way. Through the glass, the world went simple. No color, no bark, no badge patches. Just heat and not heat. A school of minnows silvering past the rest. The gunner loves that simplicity. He says it takes the noise out. He says it turns the night into a chalkboard, where mistakes write themselves first. He had the thermal on a monopod sunk into dirt that knew how to hold. He kept both hands open on the frame the way a pianist rests before the first note. Breath in to count, out to draw a straight line. His voice dropped to the calm you hear on ranges when the next thing matters. Target left of the saddle, he said. Long limbs. Not cat. Not man. Stand by. We slid into lanes without the talk, because old repetitions know the way better than we do. I took the low right. Another Marine owned the center. The boot did not get a lane. He got the job of being as small and as quiet as possible, which can be the heaviest job. On the thermal, the shape arrived out of brush as a clean, hot sketch. The head glowed less than it should have. The torso glowed more. The joints looked like punctuation and a long sentence that had run out of commas. On my glass. In the normal world, I could barely keep it in. The chaparral ate outlines and gave back lies. But in the gunner's eye, it stood there on two legs, like a problem that did not mind being solved. Rise confirmed. The gunner breathed. Posture is wrong. Gate unknown. Do not light it unless he did not finish, because the thing chose motion. It broke into a run that did not break the way running breaks. No stutter, no gafir, just an ease into speed, like it had been waiting at the line for a pistol that never fired and had to start without one. The thermal drew its steps in a series of clean, repeating shapes. The footfalls landed where feet land when they have spent hours teaching themselves how to keep quiet. Elbows set back and swung with a patience animals never need. The head did not bounce. The head rode the body like a rider who never touches the reins. You could hear our brains making excuses use. Suit, prank, parkour kid with a death wish. Nothing out here wants a prank to go to court. The slope was mean. The brush was full of a kind of dark that likes faces. Range, the gunner whispered to the radio without pressing. Human or not human in the south draw. No shots yet. Copy. The radio made a listener's hum, and then remembered it had not been invited. We stayed on our own ears. The thing cut between two buckwheat crowns and showed us a profile that made all the jokes go kisty. The forelimbs were too long for deer and too spare for bear. Where muscles should have stacked, the thermal showed cables like lines drawn by a careful child. The knees worked in a way the human knee does when it is proud of itself and a little bored. The boot spoke his thought, so softly, the night would have to kneel to hear it. I think it is wearing our idea of a body wrong. Through the optic, the gunner tracked without hurry. His trigger finger stayed high on the frame, saintly. The reticle floated near a shoulder that was only a shoulder if you forgave it for not being one. He said, I have the shot if needed. We did not take it. You are allowed to be careful even when every part of you thinks careful looks like fear. The brush gave back a little heat signature that might have been a quail asleep, might have been a rock that had kept the day too long. The runner ghosted behind it and appeared uphill a breath later, without any of the heat smear a body leaves when it pushes through the snarl. The thermal stayed clean. Too clean. As if the land had decided not to tell on it. We watched the cadence. It never stumbled. It never overreached. It ran like someone had borrowed a shape and did not want to disrespect the lender with sloppy work. The gunner breathed again in that metronome way and said, check the arms. You see that? We all saw it then. Not the running at itself, but the undecided place at the end of each zoinky, as if the hands wanted a job their body had not assigned yet. They came forward, then flattened, then curled, then flattened again, like a memory of claws, arguing with a memory of fingers. The boot's breath hitched. and he pressed the heel of his hand against his chest plate in the exact spot a person presses when they want to convince their heart to quiet down. The gesture made me want to tell him a joke and pretend the world would go back where it belonged. But jokes are for rooms, not for ridges. The thing climbed. It did not tire. Even the thermal could not find labor on it. The dark above its head took each exhale and pretended nothing had happened. We ran our checks the way faith gets run, quietly and in order. Backstop clear. No friendlies in the pocket. No training area bleed. Wind honest. Noise normal, except for one missing insect that must have punched out early. The runner reached a bad cut in the slope, where water had taken too much all at once last winter, and left a bite a man would go around. It went through at speed and never sank. The heat mapping did not show a footfall sliding. It showed presence, then presence again, like the ground had offered it a hand and pulled. The gunner said, "This thing is doing physics a favor it does not deserve." The boot said, "I hate that sentence." We tracked it to the shoulder of the opposite ridge. At the top, it slowed in the theatrical way things do when they want you to see that they have not broken a sweat. It turned a quarter profile and lifted its head. And even in thermal, even in that false moonlight, you could feel the satisfaction. Not animal triumph. Human attention hunting a mirror. It held that look, a heartbeat. Then the body did something disloyal to itself. The posture loosened. The long joints softened. The hot lines bent toward the earth, the way a branch finally remembers wind. It dropped. Not a fall. A chosen change, as if remembering an original instruction. Hind limbs accepted less. Forelimbs accepted more. The heat signature blurred for a finger's width, then settled into a shape the world pretends to know. 4 points, where there had been 2. We lost it for a breath in a scrub pocket. The gunner said, "Reacquiring, and every bush on that side of the ravine decided to belong to every story we had ever told about them at Wussies." The thermal stumbled the way eyes do when a flashlight sweeps a crowd. Heat everywhere. Too much brush trying on the same shape it was. The gunner breathed once through his teeth, a careful sound, and weighed the world back into a single frame. "Reacquired," he said. But the word did not feel like victory. The shape skimmed a seam in the slope, where every runner I know would stutter. It did not. It chose each footfall, as if the ground were answering questions we had not asked. We held fire, the way you hold your breath under a low bridge. No reason to shoot. Every reason not to. I kept telling my hands to be smarter than my fear. My hands listened and trembled anyway. The runner crested the far shoulder and let its posture fall apart in stages. Tall, to taller to something that remembered 4 points and preferred them. The hot lines softened. The head lowered. The arms decided they were forelegs again and forgave themselves for forgetting. Then it was gone. Not magic. Just the kind of gone that brush does better than anything built by people. Sound came back in layers. Crickets first, then the ocean pretending it was closer than it was. Then the whisper of someone's sleeve when he finally let his shoulders drop. The radio clicked once like a polite cough. We held the perimeter a few minutes longer than we needed to, because leaving early felt like stepping out in the middle of a sentence and hoping the period would find itself. The gunner finally eased off the optic and set it down like a sleeping child. "Deer are weird, right?" the boot said again, trying to make a path back to ordinary. "I have seen deer do odd things," I said, and tasted the lie as it left my mouth. "Not that. Not like that." We packed up slow. When we shouldered rucks, someone near the back said a word that fit the thing too well. Someone else answered with a laugh that sounded like a prayer. We tried the name on the way units try a joke on, ready to toss it if it bit. It did not bite. We took the long way back to the trucks, not because the short way was bad, but because the long way let our brains cool to a temperature where words could live again. Boots on the ridgeline made that good crunchy sound that tells you the ground is still your friend. Nobody wanted to be first to say what we had seen. The boot tried twice and ended up asking if anyone had snacks, as if food could weigh more than fear. The gunner set the optic in its case like a priest putting a book away and cleared his throat to make room for ordinary. At the vehicles, we did the after-action ritual without looking at each other too much. Sights back to safe. Radios clicked to the channel that does not carry feelings. Water bottles came out like a magic trick the body keeps for late night. Somewhere in there, the laughter found us. Not the wild kind that tries to chase terror around the yard. The pal, neat laugh that makes a pocket for your hands so they will stop shaking. The boot said, "So, are we the upright deer watch now?" And someone snorted, and someone else said, "I am not stitching that on a morale patch." Names went into the air like flares and burned out. The gunner said, "We need something that sounds like we made a choice, not like a thing chose us." The boot offered a bad pun, and we loved it just enough to keep breathing. I will not repeat the pun. Some mercies belong to the moment. We ended up with a name that put teeth on what we saw, and then filed those teeth down so we could carry it on a shoulder without bleeding. It was ridiculous and perfect. It belonged on a t-shirt and a caution sign at the same time. We said it twice, then 3 times, and the 3rd time it sounded like we had earned it. The ridge behind us went back to being a long, quiet line. The ocean sent a breath inland and patted the chaparral down like a parent, smoothing a child's hair after a scare. We stood in a circle that was not quite a circle, all of us pretending to check gear, while actually checking one another for cracks. There is always that one guy who wants the world to be simple and therefore safe. He is useful when the sky falls and someone needs to count. And he is less useful when counting is the problem. He started in with the reasonable explanations. Misidentified animal. Trick of light. A guy in a costume with a death wish and good quads. We let him talk because talking is a kind of triage. When he was done, the gunner said a soft, steady sentence that set our little name in place like a cornerstone. Or it ran uphill on 2 legs, and we saw it. Silence after that felt honest for the first time all night. We packed the last of it. The boot carried an extra coil of rope, like it could tie the dark down if asked nicely. I signed the log with the new name, tucked where only we would notice, a private joke that would not read as anything to anyone else. Before we climbed in, the ridge gave us one more gift, a sound from a ravine that did not belong on any animal I can list, and not quite on any gear either. A trill with a human mistaken on it, like someone learning a call from a tape and playing it back into the wrong throat. We froze. The radio, polite as ever, chose that moment to warm up with a click that sounded exactly like the beginning of my own voice. We let the radio talk first, the way you let a guest cut the cake, to see if it is going to crumble. Nothing but the station's tidy breath. We waited through that small click that sounds like a tongue deciding whether to say grace, and when it did not, we took back the night one ordinary thing at a time. Water. Roll call. A check of latches that did not need checking. The boot stared at his hands like they were a pair of animals he had just met and wanted to impress. The gunner sat on the bumper and read the ridge backward, as if he could unspool the last hour and find a place to knot it shut. After action is part medicine, part law. You put the facts down where the day shift will see them. You do not embroider. You do not turn your voice into thunder. You put each piece on the table like a tool, clean and ready for someone else to pick up. We did that. Most Lily, the reasonable guy, tried to be a good citizen of the ordinary. Man in a suit. Weird prank. Deer with a bad leg learning new ideas about balance, light and shadow, and the optic playing tricks. Because heat is a liar. Because men are liars. Because we are all liars when the dark gives us homework. I wanted him to be right so badly it hurt. I wanted to buy his simple and put it in my pocket and use it like a coin whenever memory asked for payment. I wanted to say the word misidentification and watch the ridge nod, like a teacher who has been waiting for a student to find the keen answer. The gunner took his time before he spoke. He is not a mystic. He likes data that smells like dirt and carbon. He likes checklists that end where they are supposed to end. He rubbed a line on the stock of the thermal with his thumb until the plastic warmed, then said very even. A shape ran uphill on two legs, and we watched it stop being that shape when it chose to. Nobody argued out loud after that. The quiet filled in with the small noises that make people trustworthy again. Zippers, the crack of a knuckle, the low swearing someone does when a strap twists in a way it has no right to. The boot laughed once without a reason and looked embarrassed, like his mouth had borrowed someone else's plan. I opened the log and wrote what I could live with. Odd movement in draw. Possible misidentified deer. No engagement. No injuries. Unit morale stable. I drew a tiny square in the margin and filled it in, the way I always do. A small window I can put extra night behind and close. That should have been enough to bring the world back to a good, boring shape. It did not. The air carried a tone you only hear after the body has spent too long deciding whether to run or kneel. It is the sound of the engine cooling under the hood of your spine. When we finally climbed in and the convoy rolled, the headlights wrote two clean lines down the service road. Chaparral slid past like a crowd with its back turned. The ocean threw its cold breath over the ridges and patted us on the head for being sensible children. The boot rode shotgun and kept sneaking looks into the side mirror, as if the mirror could be coaxed into telling the truth. The windshield refused. I told him not to invite the past to sit in the back seat. He said he was just making sure the future was not catching up. Halfway to the hardball, the radio decided to practice good manners again. Clean carrier. A little hiss, like fresh nite. Then a voice that wore one of our names, the way a borrowed jacket wears a new shoulder. It said hello, in a tone that belonged to the chow hall, not to the ridge. The sound reached into my chest and found the place where relief usually lives, and did not find it. We let the word hang. No one answered. It came a second time, then a third, each one more exact than the last, as if the set were learning us the way a dog learns a house. The gunner reached over and turned the volume down with two fingers, like he was lowering a shade without offending it. At the lot, under the tall lamps that make everything look honest, we did one more check of gear that did not require checking. The boot lingered and asked me if deer can ever look back at you like they are doing math. I said I have seen deer do odd things. I did not say the rest yet. I did not say, not that. Back in the barracks, the air had the scrubbed smell of detergent and policy bunks squared, boots lined. The trivial kindness of a vending machine humming to itself at the end of the hall. I sat on the edge of the rack and waited for my breathing to come out of the hills and back into the room. I thought about the way the runner moved, about the posture that knew too much about us and not enough about itself. I thought about the trill that had a mistake in it. I thought about the small satisfaction that crossed a heat map when attention landed and stuck. I called the map on my desk to mind. Pins in places, circles where circles probably do not belong. A line penciled from the high country to the coast, thin as thread, strong as a bad habit. I did not like being the person with that map, but I did not trust anyone else to hold it for me either. There are nights when the mind surrenders to simple mercy. This was not one. When sleep came, it brought with it a slope and a line of footprints and the feeling that the ground under them had been negotiated, not walked. In the dream, I lifted the radio to my mouth and heard my own voice come out before I pressed the button. I woke with the sentence that would not leave. There are explanations, and there is what we saw. And the two can live in the same house only so long before one asks the other to move out. The next day, someone would ask what we thought it was, and I would give the safe answer first and the honest answer second. The honest one would end with a line I had learned to be careful about, because once you say it, you cannot unsay it. I have seen deer do odd things, I would tell him. The door to the ready room opened before I could decide whether to stop there, and a voice from the hallway, a woman's voice, called for help in a way that made every part of me stand up, because it sounded like a person we all knew, except for one small wrong note that did not belong in any human throat. The sky had been the color of a bruise all week. Ash fell in the slow, stingy way snow falls when it does not believe in its self. We were a guard detachment, posted at a checkpoint where a county road turned into a ribbon of closure tape, and a promise that we would keep people from driving into the fire to save what could not be saved. The lieutenant ran the post with the kind of calm that makes coffee taste like a plan. Generator humming, reflective vests stacked, masks hanging like prayers on hooks. He kept a little notebook where he wrote who passed, which engine company waved, what hour the wind shifted, who looked at the line of flames and made a face like their own house was in there. In the worst heat, the hills sounded like an animal with a cough. Trees popped with the snap of old bones. When the wind took a breath, you could hear a low freight sound, the fire pulling air through gullies it owned. I have learned that sound once, and I do not need to learn it twice. Toward the end of a long day that thought it was a night, a woman screamed out of the timberline. It rolled down into us like a falling ladder. Not the small hurt kind of scream, the full-bodied, help me kind that makes the neck of every person in uniform lengthen. The lieutenant looked at us, then to the tree line, then back at the map we had taped to a folding table, as if the paper might tell him a better answer than the one he already had. We did the quick talk that makes caution wear a human face. No one goes alone. Keep eyes on the wind. Carry the big flashlights, because small lights tell lies when smoke gets creative. If it is a civilian who slipped past a barrier, we bring them back on the run. If it is a firefighter, we get on the radio and lift the sky. The scream came again, tearing down canyon in little bends that matched the shape of the road. She was close enough now that you could hear breath on the front of the sound. The lieutenant stepped to the edge of the asphalt and called back, steady and clear, announcing who we were, where we were, what we could do. For a heartbeat, the forest answered with its work. Embers falling like little coins into redoff, the soft roar of a crown fire, far upslope, the tick of ash against our hard hats. We waited that extra beat. You learn to wait in crisis so the world can finish the sentence it is trying to say. The woman screamed a third time, nearer, so near you could point to the tree she must be behind. The lieutenant raised a hand to hold us for one more breath and drew air to call again. And from that same dark green, from that exact same patch of trees, a voice that wore his 20 years and his cadence stepped out of the smoke and said his greeting first. The lieutenant's face did a strange double thing, shock in the eyes, calm in the jaw. He did not turn to see who had borrowed his voice. He lifted his palm to keep us quiet and called back with the exact same words, measured, official. The way you talk to the lost when you need them to trust you enough to be found. The trees answered him in his own tone again. It was not an echo. Echoes don't get the rhythm right. This had the timing of a person who had listened carefully and wanted to show you how well they had listened. It even carried the same small smile he puts on the ends of hard sentences so they will land soft. We did not run in. We did the professional thing. We held the road, lit the verge, and brought the big lamp up slow, like a sunrise you control. Smoke turned the beam into a solid bar you could lean on. The light found trunks, found brush, found ash, turning the air into weather. It did not find a woman. It did not find the lieutenant, because he was standing next to me. The generator hiccuped, then remembered its job. The notebook on the table lay open to a page where the lieutenant had written a line about wind shift and underlined it twice, hard enough to dent the next sheet. He tore that page free with his thumb and slipped it into his vest without looking down, as if he had just remembered paper can be a kind of anchor. The voice came a third time, from the same patch of timber, closer now, as if the speaker had stepped out into the road we were guarding and put a hand up to shade their eyes against our light. It said the lieutenant's name exactly as I say it, when I need him right now and not later. He answered himself the way a good officer answers a call. Name, unit, location, offer of help. The voice copied it a beat later, like a kid repeating a teacher and waiting to see if the class would laugh. I felt the rule move into my mouth. Do not give your name to the dark when the dark uses it first. I did not say the rule out loud. I just closed my teeth on it, and it tasted ash. We backed up to the trucks without announcing that. Is what we were doing. Nothing dramatic. Just a small choreography we have practiced for other reasons. A step, a glance, a hand on the door. A check that everyone has a hand on a door. The lieutenant kept talking, steady, offering safe paths, marking hazards, like a man drawing lines on a map for a person he cannot see. The forest answered with the sound of a match held too long. Not flame. The pre-flame, the tiny roar that means a thing is thinking about being fire. The beam of the big lamp fluttered once and steadied. Something in the timber shifted weight and tried to sound like brush. We were inside the truck before the mind told the hands to be inside the truck. Doors shut with the good heavy sound of an argument ending. Locks clicked. Windows came up. Breathing got honest. The lieutenant kept his voice in the open. He stood outside our cab, between the headlamps and the timber line, framed like a man in a lesson. He spoke to the trees, the way you speak to a frightened person you cannot see, firm and kind and full of instructions they can live inside. The tree spoke back with his mouth. In the rear seat, the youngest among us whispered, "Sir, please step back," and added a sir that sounded too young for his own throat. The lieutenant did not step back. He did not step forward. He held where the road met the county line, and the closure tape fluttered, and the smoke learned how to be a curtain. The voice in the timber shifted from greeting to pleading. It bent the word help, in a way no human throat bends it. A little too smooth, a little too clean, like a recording played on new speakers that do not understand how grief roughens sound. The radio on our dash lit its tiny green, found a carrier, and cleared its throat in the exact rhythm the timber had used. We turned our heads just enough to see it. The set did not transmit. It listened, and the little light made the cab feel smaller. The lieutenant said one last sentence into the trees. "If you can see our lights, walk to them now." And the same sentence walked out of the trees, wearing his cadence, and stepped into the cab through the speaker, close enough to fog the plastic. We looked from the trees to the radio and found out what happens when two mouths use one voice in the same breath. The answer did not feel like an answer. It felt like a decision being made without us. And then, from deep in the smoke, something trotted across the beam on two legs, like a deer trying out a new trick, and the big lamp stuttered, as if it were afraid to show us what it had seen to my desk at home. Looks like a supply drop gone to seed. Maps unfolded and refolded until the creases think they are roads. Pens that only write when the sentence matters. A coffee ring around the county where nothing ever happens, because everything always happens there, and the locals have decided to call it nothing to keep it tame. The stack in the middle is the reason I do not sleep on time. Printed emails, typed reports, hand-scratched notes that started as voice memos is because men do not like to put certain things into text until they have been alone with them for a while. I keep a binder with a title that will not make me blush if someone asks what it is. Field Anomalies, Cross-Service. The subtitle is A Promise to Myself. Handle with care. A serving soldier started the stack without meaning to. He ran a small online place where uniforms could tell each other honest stories without rank standing on their necks. At first, it was exactly what you would expect. Boot tales, near misses, the quiet reliefs that only make sense if you have been wet and scared at the same time. Then he asked an open question. Anyone ever hear the woods talk back? He meant it as a joke. He told me later he meant it as a joke. What came in after that did not feel like a joke. Hundreds. That is the word I use, because it is true, and because it is plight to truth. The stories arrived in the middle of the night, and the middle of lunch breaks, and the middle of watches, when someone stepped away for 1 minute to pee, and found their hands shaking at the keys. He collected them, because collecting is what you do when the alternative is to leave people alone with a thing they will carry for years. The voices have a weathered sameness. Gentle meanness when they are afraid. Careful humor when the thing they are describing has teeth. A need to be believed that is stronger than the need to be right. I mark the common features in pencil because pencil forgives. A voice that wears a name it has not earned. A figure in old clothing, standing where only badge and escort should stand. An animal that tries on a person's walk and improves on it. Some reports hum with wildfire ash. Some smell like salt and dust from bases where the ocean teaches bravery to be quieter than usual. Some come from the green east, where highways hide in trees and ranges share borders with cemeteries older than the flag. Whatever this is, does not respect county lines. It likes edges, fence lines, wash cuts, timber lines, the seam where training doctrine meets old land rules. I lay one account beside another and let the patterns argue. A Marine's voice against a guardsman's, an airman's careful list of radio anomalies against a cop's story about a deer hitting its own skull against a tree until it remembered it was not supposed to be doing that. The words are different. The weather is different. The echo is the same. I heard my own voice from the wrong place. I saw a walk that should not belong to that body. I chose not to answer, and I am still not sure whether that was bravery or fear. I want to tidy it. I want to take a marker and draw circles until the circles tell me what to do. But the soldier who started the collecting taught me a better habit. Let the stories sit beside each other without forcing them to be brothers. Let them breathe. If they share a last name, they will tell you. Still, patterns sneak in. Things borrowing. Things returning. Things using the oldest trick there is. If I can sound like you, you will trust me long enough to let me close. From there, it is only a step to the fence line and the word hello. One afternoon, the soldier calls me from a break room with vending machines that hum like contented animals. His voice sounds like gravel under a tire going slow. He has added 10 new accounts in 2 days. A woman in the reserves who will not camp anymore, not even in her own yard. A medic who does not like to walk alone between tents now, even in daylight. A hunter who thought he was a skeptic until the woods said his childhood nickname in a tone only 2 people ever used, and one of them was dead. He says I cannot vet all of this, and I say you are not supposed to. He says I need a frame, and I say, then we use the smallest one that fits. The frame we choose is not a monster with a proper noun. The frame is a caution. If a voice greets you from where no mouth should be, do not answer with anything you cannot bear to hear again, from a place you cannot reach. I list the sensible counters on a separate sheet, because they matter. Misidentification. Mimic birds playing soldier for the fun of it. Radios picking up chatter from who knows where, wearing it like the wrong coat. Pranksters and bored kids and lonely men who have learned that the quickest way to be somebody is to make a story and then make yourself its center. I keep that list clean so I will not forget it when my blood runs fast. Then I look at the accounts that will not sit down for that list. The ones where an optic watched a thing move in a way physics does not advertise. The ones where tracks enter a wash and do not come out, and nobody on scene believes the wash did any magic, not even the ones who want to. The ones where something inside the fence acts like outside, and something outside acts like it paid for a pass. I start pinning, not to a wall, to the inside of my skull. South of Flagstaff, a munitions depot with teeth under snow. Along the coast, a base where brush eats outlines and gives back stories. Back east, the training grounds that borrowed their borders from older maps everybody pretends not to see. A neat triangle, if you are the kind of person who loves triangles. I do not love triangles. I love margins, where you can write notes and then erase them later if you need to pretend you never thought the thought. The phone lights up with a message from the soldier. A long one. He says he found an older voice to add to the stack. A man who wore a uniform and then wore a different one. A healer who knows 2 languages for fear. Not a folklorist exactly. Not a chaplain exactly. Something like both. He has agreed to talk on camera to men who cannot sleep, unless somebody older tells them sleep is allowed. I sit there with the phone in my hand and feel the air in the room change. The way rooms change when a window opens somewhere you cannot see. A part of me wants to say, good. Maybe he will have rules that do not sound like superstition when you say them in the light. Another part wants to apologize in advance for asking him to hand those rules to people who did not grow up with them and might use them as novelty instead of medicine. I text back, the only truth I have at the moment. Bring him water. Bring him respect. Let him set the terms. The soldier sends a last note. He has one instruction he asks me to pass along to you before he sits down. Do not put a name to what the land is doing unless you are ready to meet that name on its feet. I look at the stack. I look at the map. The triangle I refuse to love sharpens itself at the corners as if to spite me. And from the other room, from the small radio I keep for weather and fires, and not for voices that do not belong in kitchens, a greeting floats out in the exact tone a medicine man uses when he begins a lesson, and it uses my name as if it has been practicing. Quantico's west side wears its woods like a uniform that forgot how to be casual. Pines in ranks, hollows that keep secrets, because that is their job. A creek that pretends to be small until rain remembers it. Training happens in the background like weather. The foreground belongs to things with hooves and things with patience. The military police officer I spoke with carries his calm the way some men carry a knife. Handy, quiet, meant for use, not for show. Off shift, when the light goes thin and the bugs start tuning their instruments, he takes a stand on a friend's lease just outside the boundary. No swagger in it, just a man with a thermos, a climb into a tree, and a trail camera hung at a smart height to catch what walks, where people only guess it walks. He knows these woods. He says that like a promise and like a warning. He can tell you where a fox will cross if the moon is this shape instead of that. He can show you the exact bend where a buck will choose pride over safety. He trusts the habits of animals because animals love habit. It is people who fall in love with chaos. That evening, the air settled in cool layers, warm at the face, owled at the wrists. A hazy moon threaded itself through branches like a careful needle. He climbed. 3 rungs, then 4, then the quiet stretch onto the stand. The metal gave the small, respectful groan it always gives, and then remembered how to be still. The trail camera's red eye dozed and woke, a blink so soft you could miss it. He checked wind with a little squeeze bottle and watched the dust float like a thought he did not plan to say out loud. Perfect, he told no one, and let the woods resume their sentence. He is not a man who spooks at brush talk. He can name the small sounds by species and by mood. The first set of footfalls he ignored on purpose, because you do not reward the show-offs. The second set he filed under routine. It was the third set that made the hairs along his forearms vote to be taller. Twigs counted quietly along the lower trail, then stopped at a place where the creek bottom widens and the trunks space out like polite strangers. Silence opened like a door. From where he sat, he could see the narrow trunk of a young oak, as straight as a rule laid across paper. Something stood just beyond that trunk. It did not shuffle. It did not fuss. It held itself the way an idea holds still, while choosing its next word. He let the stand take his weight, so no hinge would complain. The moon fit itself to a gap and drew a thin silver line along a shoulder he could not yet name. He reached for his binoculars, slow enough to make a statue jealous. Leather creaked the way saddles do in old stories. The woods noticed and pretended not to. The first glimpse told a simple tale. Deer, broad in chest for the season, neck heavy, head low. He pressed the focus a whisper, and the tale forgot how to be simple. The ears sat a little wrong. The slope from brow to muzzle looked like someone had been asked to remember the shape from memory and had done a good job without doing a perfect one. The forelegs bore the weight, like they were arguing with it. He tasted metal in his mouth, the kind you get when the body runs ahead of the brain. He let the sensation pass, like bad weather. The figure tilted its head and considered the oak. The angle at which it considered did not belong to deer. Too upright in the neck, too calculating by half, the way people look at a thing they intend to use and have not yet decided how. A drift of breeze brought the creek's cold breath up to him. The thermos at his hip pressed friendly against his jacket. He did not move. The thing down there took one soft step. It placed its forelimbs in a way that would have made any hunter in the county say the word wrong without meaning to. Then, with a patience that made his teeth ache, it leaned its head back and set the front of its skull against the oak. He thought, for a foolish half-second, that it would scratch an itch or scent the bark, the way bucks do in the talkative season. Instead, it drew back just a little farther than sense allows and drove its head forward into the wood. The sound was not a crack so much as a deep, wooden complaint. The oak shuddered. Bark lifted in a small, tired roll. The figure down there held still a long breath, as if listening to the tree for advice. It drew back again. Not far, just enough to let some awful patience settle into the moment. Then it drove its head into the trunk a second time. The stand took the echo and handed it up his legs. The creek answered with a hush that sounded like a hand over a mouth. He did not move. He did not even let his eyes move fast. He watched in the slow, careful way that lets the world believe you are part of the furniture. A third time. The angle was wrong for any animal that loves itself. It was the angle a person uses when they mean to break a lock without waking the house. Wood fibers sighed. The young oak held. He thought of every odd thing he had ever seen in uniform, and how most of them had turned into ordinary again once the sun did its work. This did not feel like the kind of odd that forgives daylight. The figure's forelimbs shifted on the ground in a hesitant, almost delicate patter, as if they were deciding what to be. The ears did not belong to deer in that moment. They belonged to concentration. It leaned back, farther than any buck with sense. His mouth filled with that penny taste the body makes when it wants a memory to stick. He could smell sap opening. He could smell the creek's clean chill. He could not smell the animal. The fourth strike landed with intention instead of force. The oak gave a little. A ribbon of pale wood showed through like bone under a scrape. He expected the creature to lick the bark, the way they do when marking. It did not. It held its head against the trunk, as if listening for orders from inside the tree. The trail camera woke and slept again, with that red blink that means later there will be pictures that do not help. He did not reach for it. He did not reach for anything. Reaching turns you into a noise. The figure eased back. A string of something wet clung from brow to bark and swung once and well. He told his mind to call it sap. His mind did not argue. It simply refused to feel better. It set its head again. The stand flexed under him in a way it had never bothered to before. Down below, the animal the draft of an animal made a small adjustment in the joints that read more like a person lining up a tool than a beast finding purchase. He thought of the rule older men had said to him when he took this lease. If a thing in these woods looks almost right, treat almost as a warning. He repeated it like a prayer that had learned to keep its voice down. The next strike did not come. Instead, the creature drew itself taller by degrees, as if remembering a lesson that had cost it friends. The neck lengthened into the wrong posture. The weight rolled back onto the hind limbs. One forelimb hovered, uncommitted, fingers or not fingers undecided in the half-light. It stood. The motion had the clean, practiced quality of someone who has rehearsed a trick in private and is trying it in public for the first time. The head turned toward the stand. The eyes did not shine the way deer eyes shine. They held the moon like a secret cupped into both hands. He understood, with the kind of understanding that arrives slowly, and all it knew was that the thing had known where he was from the first footfall. It had been playing at the tree for his benefit, or for its own, or for some third reason that did not care about either of them. The limb that might be an arm lifted a little, a greeting that did not want to be friendly. The body swayed toward balance that belonged to a different species and found it anyway. Then it turned its face fully toward him and began to open its mouth. The mouth opened the way a hatch opens on a ship that does not want to show you the sea behind it. Not wide, just enough to let something pass. "Hello," it said. Not a deer noise in a human throat. Not a person doing an impression of an animal. A word in the clear, built with all the right parts and set free in his direction. It used the tone polite strangers use when they need to borrow a light. He did not move. Stillness felt like the only tool he could hold without dropping. "I know you are there," it said, in the voice a neighbor might use through a fence, when the fence is more suggestion than rule. The stand felt like a loud machine under him. His own heartbeat thumped through the platform into the trunk, a poor man's drum. The creature cocked its head as if to listen better, not to the sound, but to the intent behind the sound. "Come down," it suggested, casual, like a friend who already has the truck running. He tasted metal again, a clean coin pressed under his tongue by a hand that could only be his own. He kept breathing so small the air forgot it owed him anything. The face tried on shapes. The mouth softened into a smile that did not belong to deer or to men who mean it. The eyes stayed wrong in a way he could not teach his brain to forget. The forelimb lifted, palm or not palm angled up. The gesture you use when you promise you will not bite. "This is a safe place," it said, and laid a warmth under the sentence that sounded like a memory he did not own. Behind him, night leaned closer. The creeks remembered it had stones and peed water over them in a louder whisper, as if trying to give him cover. The trail camera's small red eye blinked awake and held. He did not look at it, because looking takes your eyes away from the only thing that matters. He let time lengthen until seconds felt like rubber bands. The creature did not seem to mind. Patience lived on it, like fur. The mouth shaped another word, drew breath for it, then held the breath, as if deciding which version would fit him best. His phone, silenced, hummed once against his thigh. A ghost of a vibration. No tone, just enough to remind him he was a person with a name inside a pocket, and a mother who had taught him what to do when the wrong voice says that name from the dark. He closed his teeth around the rule and did not answer anything. The creature's head tilted the other way, small, testing, and the knot hand twitched like it wanted to learn a new trick. "I will wait," it said very gently, as if he had asked it for a favor. He counted to a number that felt sensible and then kept going. Down in the wide place by the creek, a branch gave an underweight. Not the weight in front of him. A second weight, a second presence. Quiet until quiet was a tactic and not a state. The first figure turned its wrong eyes toward the noise and made a soft, irritated sound that belonged to a different body than the one it wore. That was when he knew waiting would not end this. He leaned into the stand's tree, put his mouth close to bark, and chose the smallest motion he could make that would still count as a plan. And the thing below stepped forward, as if it had been reading ahead in the same plan all along. Daylight made a liar of the night in all the usual ways and still managed to leave the important parts alone. The stand looked small and silly in the sun. The creek wore its clean voice like a fresh shirt. Birds argued the way they always do when nothing is wrong. He walked in careful, not because he was spooked, but because a measured stride tells the ground you are willing to listen. He marked the oak with his eyes before he let his boots near it. Bark lifted in tired curls where pressure had lived. The pale stripe where wood had shone through in the dark looked more like bone than he wanted it to look, and not like bone at all if you stood 3 steps to the left. The trail camera blinked its red memory and waited to confess later. He let it wait. He crouched where the soil kept a record. Marks pressed into damp duff, in a pattern the field guide would call deer, until you followed them 6 paces east, and the spacing got thoughtful in a way hooves do not bother with. A half print suggested something like a heel where no heel should live. Another showed the faint, indecisive smudge of puds that wanted to be fingers and could not commit. Beside the trunk, splinters lay like the aftermath of a small, stubborn carpentry project. Mixed in were chalky shards he did not touch. He told his mind they were weathered wood. His mind let him have that for a moment, and then handed back a word he refused to say out loud. There was a smell he could not put in any cabinet. Not rot, not musk. A clean, bright sharpness, like wet metal and creek stone, and the inside of a new battery. It lived under the ordinary forest, the way a hum sometimes lives under a song and makes the song feel taller. He found one long hair caught where bark had lifted. Not deer, not dog, not any barnyard thing he could argue for with a straight face. It had a color that refused to keep a single promise as he turned it in the light. On the far side of the white place, a patch of ground had been cleaned by a hand too neat for these woods. Leaves raked aside in a slow circle. A scuff where a knee or something like a knee had considered its options. The creek bank showed a slip mark that began like a hoof track and ended like a person deciding not to fall. The prints went down into wet sand and came back up as nothing at all. He worked a careful grid with his eyes until the work got honest, and he admitted he was looking for proof that would argue him out of what he already knew. The woods offered only the kind of proof that makes you choose what to call it. He went back to the tree and set his palm flat where the strikes had landed. The oak held the warmth of morning, and a second warmth that did not belong to sun. Under his hand, the grain ran like fools. His fingers trembled, and he told himself it was the climb, not the knowing. The trail camera could have told him a cleaner story. He almost reached for it and did not. Some answers recruit more questions than a man can feast at. On the way out, he found a thread on a thorn. Not twine, not hair. A filament with the polite shine of something, made in a place with bright lights and white coats, except it clung to the thorn, the way wild things cling. He left it exactly where it was, and marked the bush with a glance he would be able to find again. Back at the truck, he sat with the door open and let the interior breathe cool air into him. He did the inventory a person does when they have already made a decision and want to pretend they are still deciding. Water, knife, a steadying hand on the dash, the weight of the phone like a small live thing against his thigh. He called home, rings stacked like fence posts, old wood in his ear, the way the line always sounds when it is crossing miles that remember different songs. He thought about how to begin without breaking any rules that had kept his family upright longer than he had been alive. His thumb hovered over the volume button because the hollow of the truck made his breath too loud. Outside, a jay heckled the creek, and the creek answered with polite indifference. The phone kept ringing, patient, old, insistent. The sound of a hallway in a house, where warnings live on hooks beside the door. When the call picked up, it did not sound like pickup at all. It sounded like silence, moving aside to let an older voice through. And before he could speak, the elder said his name in a tone that knew what had looked back at him last night. And the next word that came was the kind you do not argue with. The elder said his name once and let the line go quiet, the way a room goes quiet for a prayer. Then he spoke the word that ends arguments. No. The officer sat very still with the phone to his ear and the truck breathing around him. No, the elder said again, softer this time, like a hand placed on a shoulder. You will not tell this to anyone who does not already know the rules. You will not describe its face. You will not teach your mouth to say what it wanted you to say when it asked for your name. I saw something, the officer said, because men like him are built to report. The elder did not let the report get born. I know what you saw, he said, and I know what it is for. It is for testing doors. It is for learning which houses answer when a stranger knocks. There was the sound of a chair moving on old floorboards far away. The elder spoke as if he were looking out a window into weather he already understood. You remember the rules your grandmother gave you, he said. The officer said he did. Say them to me, the elder said. He said them, small and plain. Do not answer when the dark uses your name first. Do not pick up bones where no bones should be. Do not follow a voice into the brush, even if it cries like somebody you love. If a thing looks almost right, treat almost like a warning. Salt at the door. Water for the thirsty, but you do not invite them in. Good, the elder said, and the sound of the word felt like a door being latched. Add this. Do not speak of what you saw for a while. The officer asked how long a while was. Until it forgets your taste, the elder said, and let the silence after that answer be its own teaching. The officer told him about the tree, the strikes, the way the mouth made words. He told him about the other weight in the brush, the second presence that waited for quiet to do its work. The elder did not ask for more. He said, You will bring no trophy home. You will not keep a hair in a bag. You will not look at pictures at night. You will sweep your doorway with cedar, and you will not be alone when you do it. He felt something loosen behind his ribs, the way a knot loosens when someone older takes it and turns it in their hands. I did not answer it, he said, as if he needed a grade. The elder's voice warmed a degree. Good. It has patient teeth. Do not give it anything to chew. "On the creek," a jay scolded. The elder heard it through the phone and made a small approving sound, as if the bird had remembered its joke. "You will go back in daylight only," the elder said, with a friend who can tell jokes without being loud about it. "You will spike to the tree, and you will tell it that you are sorry somebody asked it to be a wall. Then you will leave that place alone for a season." The officer asked the question men ask when they want the world to be fair. "What is it?" The elder took his time with that part. "When people give something a name," he said, "they invite it to use that name like a road. If you want a road at your door, say the name again and again. If you want a path that grows over, do not. We call it a borrower. That is enough for what you need." He wrote the word borrower on the inside of his skull where he could carry it without saying it out loud. The elder added one more rule in a tone that made it heavy. "Do not tell the youngest. Not yet. Fear loves thin bones." The officer promised. "You will sleep with the radio off for a while," the elder said. "You will not pick up if it calls you from that box with your own voice on its tongue. You will let every greeting die on its own between now and first frosties. And if it knocks at your door after midnight and says your name in a tone that almost belongs to family, you will pour a little water on the step and sweep it away." The officer said, "What if it uses the voice of someone we buried?" The elder answered without a catch, "Especially then." They sat with the line between them like a creek. You do not cross after dark. The elder said a short sentence in a language the officer knew, without knowing how he knew it. The kind of sentence that pulls a room into a tighter circle. The officer did not ask for a translation. He bowed his head, because some instincts do not need uniforms to be learned. When the call ended, the truck seemed larger, as if it had been holding itself tense and could finally relax its shoulders. He watched the creek pour the previous night downstream until only plain water remained. He put the phone away, as if it were a tool he respected and did not plan to use again until it asked nicely. Before he drove, he set a small plastic bottle cap at the base of the oak and filled it from his canteen. "For the thirsty," he said, and felt the echo of an uncle's voice in the phrasing. The tree did not answer. The woods did not either. That felt like good news. He left without looking back, which is a rule too, even if nobody writes it down. Some men say the mind can be taught to hear what is not said and see what is not there, and for a while, I wanted that to be the kindest answer. Expectation can tune a human ear like a radio. Fear can add harmonies that were never on the sheet. A name spoken in the dark can grow its own echo just because your skull is a good room for echoes. I have a list on my wall of polite explanations. Pareidolia, the brain's habit of making faces out of brush and worry. The cocktail party effect, where your name leaps out of noise as if it had lice. Infrasound, the low notes the body registers as dread, long before the mind gets a vote. Radios bleeding the wrong channels into the right ones and wearing a familiar tone like a borrowed coat. Fatigue that turns twigs into stalkers and wind into a plan. None of that is a joke. You can save a life with that list. A person who knows their head is trying to help too hard can step back from a cliff and laugh later. I want that laugh for all of us. But the list has seams. It does not explain why a camera blinks awake when no human hand is near, and later gives you a night of frames that show a trunk and a patch of ground, and the space where something should be and is not. While the audio captures small, respectful words coming from a mouth you cannot place. It does not explain why a voice rides a closed channel in the tone a lieutenant uses to calm a lost stranger, and matches his cadence so cleanly that his own men flinch at their dashboard. It does not explain a runner that moves in heat the way no trickster suit moves leaving no labor on the map of its body, or tracks that step down into a creek's wet bank and choose not to come back up as anything at all. Skepticism is a tool. I keep mine sharp. I also keep a shelf for what does not fit on that wall of clean answers, because pretending a thing does not exist is not the same as a safety. There is another kind of explanation, older than the ones we teach in classrooms, meaner if you use it wrong, and kinder if you use it right. It says the world is a house with more doors than we remember, and some of those doors like to test the hinges. It says there are borrowers, not owners, and they try on what we are, the way a shadow tries on the shape of whoever stands nearest the lamp. It says, if you answer when the shadow speaks first, you teach it your size. I do not know if belief is required. I have watched men who do not believe obey the rules anyway and come home with their breath intact. I have watched men who do believe break a rule out of pity or pride and spend a season learning how to sleep again. A medtech told me once that in trauma tents, the mind can be taught to hear what the body is not ready to say. He meant pain. The lesson travels. A guard in wild free fire country can be taught to hear the wrong version of help. A hunter alone in a tree can be taught to hear his own name from two places at once and feel both invitations tug at his ribs. The instruction is not always malicious. Sometimes it is only curious. Curiosity out there wears teeth. So I split the difference. I keep the list on the wall where I can point to it when my hands start writing nouns they have no right to write. I keep the rules inside my mouth where I will not lose them if the night says my name first. Both are true enough to keep a body upright. The soldier who collects these reports calls to say he has been reading too long and needs a voice that is not his own. He tells me someone older wants to share a memory and prefers plain talk to labels, not a case study, a river story. He says the teller is not young anymore and does not have time for the part where we argue about whether the shape had this or that, or whether a sound could do that without a throat. He says the teller brought his grandfather into the room with him like a guest and set him down in a chair and asked him to nod when the facts were straight. I ask what kind of facts we are measuring. He says the kind that arrive with daylight and refuse to look better when you step closer. He sets the phone on speaker and I hear the room breathe. A chair, an old man's careful cough, a glass set down gentle on a coaster that has learned the weight of that glass. The younger voice says they were fishing a river a long time back, a broad bend where the water slows and the sandbars collect footprints and stories. The older voice does not waste throat. He says a shape came out of the trees at last light, and at first it was only a deer, and then it was not. He says it ruined its own head against a trunk and then tasted what it had done like a man checking a tooth. He says the sound was wrong and the patience was worse. I ask whether anyone spoke. The younger man says no. He says his grandfather's hand on his shoulder was answer enough to questions he had not asked yet. He says they watched until the watching felt like a kind of participation, and then they left, the way you leave a room where a fight is starting between people you do not know. The old man clears his throat, the way a person does when a memory is about to cost him, and he has decided to pay. He says the shape walked down into the river, as if it had been born, learning how to drown without dying. He says it stood a long moment, with the current arguing around its knees, and then did something with its body that turned 4 points into 2. I hold the phone closer to my ear because distance feels rude. And just when I am ready to ask the question, I always ask at this part, what did its mouth do when it turned toward you? The old man inhales to tell me the part I will not be able to put on any list at all. The old man said, the mouth did not do anything a mouth should do when it finds people looking at it. It did not snarl. It did not beg. It parted just enough to let breath out that had learned the wrong way to be warm. He said the shape tilted its head like a man checking the fit of a hat. Then it went back to the tree and placed the front of its skull against the bark, as if apologizing for what came next. It hit the trunk not wild, not careless, deliberate. A worker making a cut. The sound rode through the bend and up the bank and into our phones. The younger voice stopped talking. You could hear the glass on the coaster remember its job. The old man said it leaned away and then forward again and made that deep wooden complaint happen twice more. Bark lifted. Pale wood showed. The animal looked at what it had done the way a person looks at a finished chore and checks a corner for missed spots. Then it touched the mess with its tongue. The younger man made a noise in his throat that was not a word. The old man let him have the quiet and went on. It stood up then. He said the words flat, like nailing a board. Hind limbs took the weight as if this had always been their plan. The knot hands hovered undecided, then fell to its sides like a pair of bad idas. The head turned the way human heads turn when they are about to ask a question. We did not wait to be asked, he said. We stepped back along the sand where our prince knew the path. It watched like a man watches a departing train he decided not to catch. They reached the water. The river met their ankles with that cold that clears promises out of a person. The shape came after without hurry. 4 points became 2 again. Then 2 became the memory of 4. Then something between, a compromise no field guide wants to print. It walked in, until the current wrapped its thighs. The old man said the thing turned its face into the flow, the way a pilgrim faces an altar and held there. He said the river did not fight it. He said the river acted like it had been told this part already. The younger voice came back small. Did it look at you? He asked. Yes, the old man said, and nothing in him shook. It looked with attention. Attention is different from hunger. Attention keeps a ledger. Did it speak? The younger asked. Because that is what young men ask when they want a rule to follow and a boundary to wait. The old man said the river took whatever the mouth meant to try next and made it into bubbles that did not need translating. After a while, it turned downstream and walked, easy, into deeper water. It did not kick. It did not flail. It simply let the bend keep it. We went home by the long way, the old man said, and put the rods away without saying why. Next morning, we did not go back. Next season, we did not stand in that bend. Some places are not for learning. They are for remembering. The room on my end of the line felt different, as if someone had opened a door to check whether I was alone. The younger said he used to think the story was about fear, and now he thinks it is about not helping a thing that asks you to help it be wrong. The old man coughed, gentle. Names are bridges, he said. If you build one to that bend, it will walk it. The call ended there, not because any of us ran out of words, but because the right number had been said. I looked at the map on my desk. Pins in the high country, pins on the coast, a pin near a river that does not care who is right. The triangle I refused to love brightened at its corners as if it had been fed. And in the quiet after the line went dead, I could feel the edges of the bases under my fingers again. The places where training grounds sit on older ground, where fences are polite suggestions, where a new report was already walking toward me, with its boots dusty and its mouth set like a man, about to ask me whether patterns mean anything at all. Maps like to lie politely. They put edges where edges can be drawn with a ruler. They print the names of new tenants in a heavier font than the names of the old ones, as if ink could settle history by being thick enough. The ground remembers better. Ranges sit where someone else once taught their children to move in a straight line, and then in a circle, and then in a line again, because patterns help you stay alive. Cantonments rise on ridges that kept watch in an older language. Cantonments fall, and the ridge keeps watching. A fence goes up around a place where a wedding happened, and a winter happened, and a burial happened, when the river was frozen and men had to break it with poles and courage. The fence means well. The ground does not care about intention. It cares about weight, and about what was said over it, and about what was left there, because no one had hands big enough to carry everything away. I say this without accusation. The military loves efficient land the way farmers love flat fields, and railroads love straight lines. A dry plateau, a predictable wind, a long sight line, a handy distance from town, of course. This is where you practice. The old maps knew those same virtues, so the layers stack like blankets. Sometimes they warm you. Sometimes they make it hard to breathe. I have stood on a firing line where the soil reaches light brown at an exact depth that tells you people worked here with tools older than your uniform. I have walked a berm where pottery flashes up after rain, like fish surfacing for air. And the protocol says, bag and tag and notifiant. The men do. And still the ground holds back most of what it keeps, because that is its right. I have rested a hand on a post where somebody carved a square, and somebody carved a date, and before either of those some other hand pressed a palm into wet clay that a child laughed over. You cannot put any of this into the safety brief, and you cannot keep it out of your boots. Men tell me they walk a perimeter and feel a lane get narrow for no visible reason. They straighten their shoulders to make more room for their breath, and the lane politely widens. They tell me a culvert refuses to be a culvert and insists on being a song for an hour. They tell me a training day goes quiet in the way of a chapel even though no one called any service. And then a voice from nowhere tries on a name in the tone of a chaplain and gets the pause wrong at the end of a sentence. People call this folklore when they are feeling safe. People call this medicine when they are not. I keep both words the way you keep tools you did not expect to use. A historian showed me overlays once. Old trails under new roads, under range fans, under exclusion zones. The map turned into sheet music. A melody tried to rise under the notation of artillery practice. The notes agreed sometimes, and sometimes they did not. Disagreement sounds like static on the net when you know you have a clean channel. In places the overlays made a bright knot. A burial ground reminded a motor pool that it had borrowed its parking from a hill that did not plan to be paved. A drill field learned it was an old plaza when a wedge of flagstone refused to stay buried. A flag raised by men in uniform threw its shade on a story pole, carved by people who have their own uniforms and do not need ours. I have seen smart officers bow their heads there without being told a rule for bowing. You do not have to believe to feel the weight. You do not have to feel the weight to make good choices. But it helps. An older woman with a braid to her waist once told me something so simple, I was embarrassed I had not thought it ahead of her. She said, "We were here first does not mean you have to leave. It means the house has rules you might not know yet. If you live here now, you have to learn them, or you will be the one who is surprised when the kitchen light turns itself on at midnight and asks if you are hungry in a voice you thought belonged to someone you miss." So we make our little treaties. We set aside a corner and say no digging there. We let a plant keep its stubborn patch between gravel and flag lined because somebody's grandmother asked it to, and because the seeds do a job wind cannot. We pour a little water in a bottle cap at a doorway because thirst is older than fences. We leave a stone on a stone and do not tell the sergeant why, because sometimes the sergeant taught you and sometimes he forgot and needs you to teach him back. Still, some edges do not appreciate treaties written in our handwriting. The places where the low voice comes under the high voice and says hello like a test. The places where 4 points learn too. The places where a rabbit is a draft of a person, is a man. In old clothes, is a voice on the radio, is a hill that leans closer when you use a first name. I keep thinking about how instruction travels. A warning carried between generations like a pocket knife. A caution taught to kids who will stand watch on a modern perimeter as naturally as they will drive to town for groceries. A rule that says, do not give the dark your name when the dark uses it first, because names are doors, and doors swing both ways. When this is told inside families, the voice is patient. When it is told to strangers wearing our patches, the voice can sound like story time if you are not careful. I do not want story time. I want men to come home, which is why I am grateful for the old Marine with turquoise at his collar and a history in 2 uniforms. He speaks plain. He does not put teeth on what does not benefit from teeth. He calls the thing a borrower, and he does not ask you to love or fear the word. He asked you to obey it. He agreed to talk for the soldier who keeps the stack. He said he would sit in a metal chair and let the camera make everything look harder and colder than it is. And he would hand the rules to men who did not grow up with them if they would hold the rules like tools and not like toys. He said he would share what he knows about the mind after war and the way voices can walk through a man and set their feet down and leave prints that hurt. He said he would bring water, and he asked us to bring respect. The day we met him, the classroom smelled like dry erase and dust and sweat from a morning of men sitting still. He wore a small emblem from a lifetime ago and a patience that said he could wait all afternoon for us to be ready. He set a glass of water on the table and put his hand flat next to it, as if he had already decided to teach the water a job. He began with hello the way elders begin, when the lesson is going to ask you to own your breath. And then he looked straight into the lens like he could see past it and called the soldier who had done the collecting by his first name, softly, accurately, in a tone that made the hair on my forearms stand in perfect agreement, because it sounded exactly like a good man greeting another good man, and something in the speaker at the back of the room answered hello right along with him, in a version of his voice that did not belong to his chest. I do not need a map to see the loop. Fence line in desert, where a greeting wore my name. Ridge above the ocean, where a runner tried on a person's walk and liked the fit. Timberline in a fire, where a plea learned a lieutenant's cadence and used it like a key. Creek bottom back east, where a mouth put human words into night air and waited for me to come down. Call it 4 points, draw lines. You get a shape no one wants on their wall. The pattern is not the creature. The pattern is us. Uniforms standing on layered ground with radios that promised order. Our training says answer names. Follow procedure. Trust the net. The older rules say, keep your name. Do not chase a voice into brush. Let the question die. When those 2 sets of orders collide in the middle of the night, the sound you hear is not thunder. It is ribs trying to decide whose cadence to breathe to. After the classroom voice doubled itself elder and echo together, men who have seen worse than stories went still. The old Marine drank his water and did a small thing with his hand over the glass that looked like closing a gate. The speaker in the back coughed out one last syllable that belonged to no throat in that room, and then remembered how to be plastic again. I wrote borrower on my palm, where it would sweat away before lunch. I went back through our stack, like a man checking tourniquets. What keeps blood in? What keeps breath steady? What keeps your name from walking around without you? The list stayed short on purpose. Do not answer the first hello. Keep light honest and noise modest. Carry water and an old word you do not say out loud. If something looks almost right, treat almost like a cliff. When a voice offers to make your job easier by sounding like command, Let it work harder. Men called me from barracks and from the tailgates of trucks and from porches where the night has a habit of stepping close. A staff sergeant said his boot was hearing his own joke on the net after lights out. A guard in a county still coughing ash said closure tape fluttered and then spoke in his lieutenant's tone. A hunter texted a picture of an oak with tired bark and asked whether trees forgive. I told them all the same sentence and pretended it was enough. You do not have to believe. You only have to behave. Some nights the advice feels like superstition, wearing a uniform. Most nights it feels like a light you put in a window, so the dark will remember which house minds its thresholds. When a thing borrows, it improves. The rabbit learned stillness too well. The deer learned a sprint. Our knees envy. The radio learned our names and the way we grin at our own bad lines. I do not think it hates us. I think it studies. I think study can be a kind of hunger when it is done from the wrong side of the fence. So I keep walking the line in my head until my boots remember. Mesh, post, tie, wash, bluff, gate. Hello offered from the wrong direction. Hello kept in my pocket. Breath counted. Distance measured. Light steady. Partner near enough to hear me swallow. Squared entries in the log. A small filled-in box for the part we cannot write. And when men ask what to do if the voice uses the name of someone they loved and lost, I give them the only answer the old man allowed me to carry. Especially then, let it die on its own. The night after the classroom, I slept a little. I dreamed the fence hummed a low, content note, the kind wire makes when wind finds the exact speed it prefers. In the dream, I walked the perimeter, and nothing borrowed anything from me, and I did not borrow anything back. The dream ended at a gate with an honest padlock and a post where someone had carved a neat square and filled it in. When morning came, range control called about a maintenance check. Small sag near a wash. Nothing dramatic. Bring a partner. Walk it and sign. We parked by the brace with the ribbon that catches moon even in daylight and makes it its business. We took the tools because tools keep hands civilized. We followed the wire where it learns to be humble around terrain. The posts counted themselves for us, one by one. And somewhere ahead, under a floodlight that should not have been humming yet, a voice I trusted said my name in the tone that means, keep coming. You are doing fine. I am right here. We were not alone on those edges, not in any season. Sentries write the same sentences on different ground and do not compare notes until later. Desert wire, pine line, coast ravine, East Creek. The posts change. The posture does not. A Marine on a bluff said the brush kept eyes the way a pocket keeps coins. The eyes did not shine. They held light, like a decision. He shook his head once to clear the kind of story that tries to write itself for you, and went back to counting fence ties out loud, like a man reciting multiplication tables under his breath, so numbers will behave. A guard on a timber road heard footsteps come up a switchback and stop a breath outside his circle of beam. Not heavy, not timid, simply correct. He let the sound finish, being a sound, and then walked the light to where prints ought to be. The dust had decided to be theory. Nothing written. Nothing to show a supervisor except a sentence that starts with possible and ends with disciplinary. A sentry in high country set a chem light on a post to watch wind. The glow hung in place like a stubborn moon. Something passed between the light and his eyes without touching either. The glow went thin and then remembered itself. The night made a small delighted sound in the back of its throat and fell quiet. A corporal on coastal scrub heard a voice from the ravine call his first name, the way his grandmother used to, soft and managerial. He thumbed the radio off and tasted metal until the taste felt like work and not like panic. The voice did not try again. Some tests only need one question. A reservist doing perimeter under stars saw a shape extract itself from mesquite and become a rabbit in stasis, man to draft to animal to nothing at all. He refused to be counseled by that. He walked his line and greeted a saguaro out loud, because greeting a plant is either foolish or medicine, and sometimes the difference is only the part where you mean it. A scout on the east side of a training area sat in his truck with the engine off so he could hear the version of night the engine usually drowns. Something approached on 2 feet and learned to be 4 at the edge of the light. The learning made no noise any school would accept. The truck glass fogged an oval where his breath bounced back at him and kept its own counsel. We are trained to take weird and shave it down until a report will wear it in public. Suggestions became advisories. Mimicry became possible cross-channel interference. Prints that did not exist became a insinuation about substrate. Attention that felt like a hand on the back of the neck became situational awareness, heightened due to recent incidents. You can file the world into order if you do not mind how many teeth the file grows. The pressure built anyway. Not panic. Pressure. The feeling of a classroom before a quiz, when you did the readings and still think the teacher might be mean. In all these places, small engines labored for us. Generators at checkpoints, making pools of ordinary. Light towers drawing circles we trusted enough to stand in. Little guts of fuel, reporting for duty every night without complaint. On a desert perimeter, the lamp over a gate fluttered in a way that made the hairs on our arms synchronize. On a timber road, a portable rig coughed and recovered and coughed again, as if learning a new language that did not love vowels. On the coast, a yard light blinked 3 neat times in a rhythm we would later pretend was accidental. And at a base with a line of hills that know how to look like ships, a maintenance generator at the end of a service lane decided to think about something else for a while. It flickered once, the way a person blinks when dust takes a run at an eye. It flickered again, longer, as if remembering a story it had not told yet. It flickered a 3rd time and held dark just long enough for the night to take a step forward. And in that step, from brush that had been brush a second ago, a voice we trusted said our names with the easy authority of a man who signs our checks. My desk map looks like a hospital gown, held together by ties someone forgot to knot. Pins in deserts, pins in pine, pins at the ocean's lip, pins by a creek where mud keeps secrets. Red thread runs between them, because I told myself I would not draw lines, and then I did anyway one by one, each with a reason I could defend to a person I did not want to argue with. Threads do what threads do. They find a pattern, even if you swear you are not helping. One line climbs from the depot, with teeth under snow, to a ridge where heat maps taught us how pride runs. Another drifts from wildfire timber to a county road with a notebook and a lieutenant who will never agree that he was frightened. A 3rd tugs east, where an oak learned the wrong job and a mouth learned the right word and used it with care. When I stand over the map, the room changes. The air feels like a briefing that has not decided whether to be classified. The corners get a little darker, the way corners do when a teacher asks for questions and no one wants to be first. I practice good manners with the paper. I say maybe out loud. I erase as often as I draw. I write borrower so small I have to lean in to see whether I wrote it at all. I keep a second list in pencil. Reasons to cut the thread. Confirmation bias. Bad memory. Grief trying to make a face out of noise. Men who lie for attention. Men who tell the truth so cleanly it sounds like a lie and get punished for their voice control. Still, the pins ask not to be alone. You can feel it in your hands the way you feel wire hum when wind finds the right speed. Places like edges. Edges like names. Names like doors that learn to swing both ways. I tell myself the pattern does not need a center. The pattern looks back and puts a finger down on the exact place where training ground meets old ground and radios behave well enough to be trusted. From there, threads walk out like spokes. On each spoke, some version of the same lesson waits with its back against a fence post. When a greeting comes from the wrong direction in the exact right tone, you will want to answer. Do not. Men call it odd hours to add their pins. They speak softly, like thieves returning something they should not have taken. A sergeant sends a grid and says, "I do not want this to be a story." A firefighter texts a photo of closure tape that looks like it is listening. A hunter writes, "No pictures. Only this." And the message is one word. Almost. I keep going until the desk feels like a place where weather forms. The camera on my shelf clicks as it sleeps and wakes. A tiny red blink like a heartbeat smaller than a mouse. The little storm of pins and thread turns into a figure I cannot quite like. Not a triangle anymore. A wheel. Wheels turn. That is their deal. I do not want turning. I want a door that stays shut when told. A friend puts a coffee on the map, and I move the cup so its ring will not claim a county. He watches a minute and says the thing a good friend says when your eyes have learned a bad habit. Cut 2 threads. Leave 1. If it still pulls, it is real. If it goes slack, it was you. I pick up the scissors and hold them the way you hold a word you might regret. I choose a line that runs from mountain to ocean, and I cut it. The remaining line pulls harder, like a fish that has decided the hook is a good reason to live. My fingers tingle the way they tingle when radio chatter turns from weather to names. I cut a second line. The last one tightens until it hums under my fingertip. I do not love that. On the desk, the pins stop pretending to be geography and become people. Patrolman, gunner, lieutenant, elder, hunter. Kid with a rope and a joke too big for his mouth. The thread that remains runs through each of their palms and ties a small loop there, like a wedding ring from a place where vows are written by the land instead of by a clerk. I stand up because sitting feels too obedient. The room is quiet in the way a checkpoint is quiet when the night decides to grade your work. Outside my window, a light on a pole ticks, finding its idea of steady. In the wall, wires hum on a note I have learned to ignore. My radio on the shelf wears its green like a good soldier. I think about cutting the last thread. I think about leaving it until morning. I think about how mornings do not always fix what people say they fix. The radio clears its throat. Not the polite click, not the cough. The small, easy inhale people make before they say your name in the tone they know you will accept, even if you planned not to. I do not turn. "Hello," it says. It uses a version of my voice I have heard in kitchens and on ridges and in the back seats of trucks after midnight, when humor has to be careful, because laughter can tear muscle if you do it wrong. I put my hand on the map and feel the thread vibrate once, like a tuning fork touched with a feather. The voice does not rush. It learned from us. It has time. It says my name as if I have already decided to come closer. And then the power in the room dips for the space of a held breath. The light steadies like a man on an icy step, and the radio adds a second voice in the exact tone of a person I miss. And both voices ask if I am ready to hear the rest. The copy called again, as if the first time had only been a warm-up. Same tone, same patience. It took my name in its careful hands and held it up like proof that we belonged to each other. The second voice, the one with old laughter in it, stood beside the first and made the room smaller by being kind. I did not answer. I put my palm on the desk like a man steadying a map, in a breeze he cannot admit he feels. The thread between pins had gone quiet after that small tremor, the way a taut line goes quiet when the fish decides to wait you out. Across the stack, Every story I had collected remembered how to breathe. A patrol on desert wire, keeping their names in their pockets. A ridge team writing a joke on a unit patch, so fear would have to ask permission to speak. A guard at a fire line, holding a road with a flashlight and a prayer. A hunter on a stand teaching the dark that patience lives in him too. None of them answered first. That was the only part that matched across all the maps. The radio tried a new courtesy. It said my name in the easy cadence of command, then in the tone of a friend, then in the soft way family uses when they want to remind you that doors are for opening. I closed mine by degrees. Volume down, a thumb's width. Head turned just enough to break the habit of looking at the voice you are refused using. Outside, the pole light ticked as if counting for us. Inside the wall, wires sang one honest note and stayed with it. The room settled into the posture a church takes when a latecomer slips in, and everyone pretends not to notice. The copy breathed once more on the net and offered help I had not asked for. Range clear ahead, gate open, paperwork ready. All the little lies that make work feel like a hallway instead of a hill. Behind that offer, the second voice waited the way a shoulder waits for your hand. No answer, I told myself, and kept the rule between my teeth, where language could not reach it. Time stretched. The radio practiced being harmless plastic again. In that long minute, I learned a thing I wish none of us had to learn. Silence is a tool too. Used right, it turns appetite into boredom, and boredom into distance. After a while, the air in the room loosened, like a knot deciding it was tied to the wrong rope. The light on the pole outside went steady. The hum in the wires remembered how to be only a hum. The thread on the map lay still enough to look like thread, and not like a line that hoped to become a road. The set made one last sound. Not my name, not any name. A small goodbye with no throat behind it. A child practicing a bow with no audience. Then nothing. I let the nothing spread. I poured a cap of water and set it at the window where weather comes and goes. For the thirsty, I said in a voice too low to be useful to anyone but me. Somewhere on a desert fence, a sentry chose not to look back when the greeting came from behind. Somewhere on a coastal ridge, a unit name turned into a private promise and kept brave company. Somewhere in timber country, a lieutenant finished his line on the map and closed his notebook. Somewhere by a creek, a man touched a young oak and apologized for asking it to do a job. It did not choose. Each of them heard a voice that tried to sound like theirs. None of them answered. The night learned our discipline. The set stayed quiet long enough for my breath to come home. I took my hand off the map. I cut the last thread, because the friend had been right. If it still pulls after that, it is not mine to manage. I turned the radio off. The room did not change shape. The dark at the edges did not step closer. The pole light outside did not wink or weep. I waited until waiting felt like a decision I had already made. Then, from the hallway, not the speaker, not the wall, a voice my own, perfectly kept, stood just past the door and said it one last time, soft as a hand on a shoulder. Hello. I did not answer the hallway. I let the words sit down on the floor like a tired traveler who would leave when no one made room. Breath in, breath out. Count to a number a child could hold. The room did not tilt. The dark did not gain a finger's width. I stood and did the small chores that turn a night back into a house. Turned the radio face down. Put the scissors away so they would not look like a plan. Folded the map once, then once again, until counties overlapped strangers and the pins pressed into cork instead of skin. I left the water at the window. For the thirsty, a promise I can keep without losing anything I am not willing to give. Outside, morning practiced on the edges. The pole light blinked like a man remembering a joke and choosing not to tell it. Far off, A train spoke to no one in particular. The hum in the walls became only a hum, the way a heartbeat becomes only a heartbeat when fear remembers it has somewhere else to be. I wrote what I could live with in the log I keep for myself. Heard my name spoken from too wrong place. Took no action. Injuries? None. Equipment? Steady. Morale? Sufficient. Lessons retained. Do not answer first. Carry water. Keep almost in mind. Bring each other home. Then I added the little square in the margin and filled it in. A window I can close. I thought about all the men and women whose voices I have carried these miles. Patrols who kept jokes gentle so the night would not think it had been invited. Gunners who watched without turning what they watched into a trophy. Lieutenants who held a road with calm until calm wore their shape. Elders who handed out rules like tools and asked us not to make toys of them. Hunters who apologized to trees and meant it. The young who learned patience the hard way and found it was theirs now. Some of you will write to me after this and ask for a name. I will give you a rule instead, because rules do the work. Names only pretend to. Do not answer the first hello. If the dark uses your name, keep your answer in your pocket. If a thing looks almost right, treat almost like a cliff. Pour a little water at the door and leave it for whatever is thirsty that you do not plan to invite inside. Laugh, but not loud. Pray if that is your habit, and if it is not, breathe in a way that makes breathing feel like a choice. Bring someone with you, and be someone worth bringing home. Some of you will ask whether I believe. Belief is not the point. Behavior is. You can live a long time in a house whose rooms you do not rush into. There is a version of this story that ends with proof. A clean photograph. A footprint no one can argue down. A body that behaves for the autopsy table, the way it refused to behave for the woods. That is not my version. My version ends with a closed door and a glass of water and a square filled in, and a night that learned our discipline and moved on. I walked outside at last light that evening and stood by a fence that keeps honest things honest. Wind wrote its thin music across the wire. The land held its breath, the way land does when it is counting us, and deciding we have counted it back. I said a greeting to the air in the tone families use when they mean respect and nothing else. No answer came. The silence felt like a good neighbor. Inside, I folded the map for real and put it away. The pins stayed where they were because pins are honest about how small they are. The thread went in a drawer with the scissors. The rules stayed where they belong. Inside my mouth. Inside my thoughts. Before sleep, I set one last note on my desk for whoever needs it next. It said only, "You do not have to believe. You only have to behave. Leave a little water. Keep your name. Come home." I turned off the light. The house listened, then did what houses should do when people ask for rest. It kept watch. It kept quiet. End.